Good morning and welcome to the 7th meeting of the Education and Culture Committee in 2014, and can I remind all those present that electronic devices should be switched off because they interfere with the broadcasting system. Our first item this morning is to take evidence on broadcasting. The committee published a report on broadcasting last May, which focused on BBC Scotland's capacity to handle forthcoming major events, namely the referendum and the Commonwealth Games. We will take evidence from representatives of BBC Scotland later, but we'll hear first from Professor John Robertson. In February this year, Professor Robertson published research on the BBC's and STV's coverage of the referendum campaign, which will of course be of direct relevance to our later discussions. Can I welcome Professor Robertson to the committee and invite him to make a brief opening statement? Professor
Thanks
Robertson.
very much. Thank you to the committee for allowing me to do this, because much has happened. Am I too close to that? Much has happened in the month or so since I released the research paper. Much of it has been quite upsetting for me. So I want to begin by saying some fairly strong things about my experience in the last month or so. I'd like to condemn the behaviour of BBC Scotland's Department of Policy and Corporate Affairs in suppressing the dissemination of my research and in circulating an insulting and ill-informed critique of my research directly to my principal, bypassing my head of school, my dean, straight to the principal, and also circulating that to all email complaints they had about their coverage of the referendum. I'd like, secondly, to condemn, and the audience is not always here for this condemnation. I appreciate you're not part of that. I'm sorry if this seems a bit dramatic, a bit kind of over the top, but it's been a very stressful month. I'd like to condemn the silence and collusion of almost all of Scotland's mainstream media in disappearing my research, despite its massive online presence. Its online presence is a news item which has been ignored. I have my suspicions, but I don't know for certain. And thirdly, I'd like, unfortunately, to condemn the silence of almost all Scottish academics with an interest in this field, who might have been expected to challenge censorship of intellectual material. I've been personally hurt by the above combination of threat from a powerful institution. There have been no horse's head in my bed yet. I suppose that's always something. Abandonment by the mainstream media and by academia, other than my own immediate colleagues. I must give thanks to my immediate colleagues. I interpret the above as an attempt at thought control in a democracy, and of all democracies, the one I like the best. I'm very upset by that. So, happy to respond now to any questions about, or back to Chair, I guess.
Thank you very much, Professor Robertson. If we can move on to the main issue that we want to discuss today, which is, as you say, your own research. Can I ask a sort of general opening question? Could you just lay out for us what your research, well, the first part of your research, I know it's a 2-year programme, but the first year you published, as you say, about a month ago. Could you just lay out some of the findings of that first year's worth of research?
Well, it shows a crude quantitative imbalance between the number of statements reported which you could see as supportive of the Yes campaign and those you could see as supportive of the No campaign. There's a high degree of subjectivity in all of this, I appreciate. All social, political, historical research is subjective. I am committed to a kind of research which is often referred to as grounded theory. I take it very, very seriously. I try to hold back as much as I can. I teach students about this. I have been doing for 30 years, teaching students about the importance of not leaping in the way that journalists often do, I'm afraid to say. And so that seemed to grab everybody's attention. Yes campaigners on the web immediately flew up into a kind of fury of, evidence at last, 3-to-2 ratio. My feeling was that the 3-to-2 ratio wasn't very important, actually, because a lot of it was down to just saying, well, let's hear what the Liberal Democrat says, let's hear what the Conservative says, and that led to an imbalance of a quantitative nature. What I thought was far more important and drew less attention, I think, was there are 3 or 4 items. One was sequence, and that's the common tendency in that period to begin with bad news. Now, there is a lot of evidence that audiences are quite resilient to political messages. They're less resilient when it comes to the economy. They're much more likely to believe bad news stories. So I would suggest that beginning with bad news stories about the economy, about job losses and so on, has a disproportionate influence. And there was a tendency, especially for Reporting Scotland, to begin with bad news stories more than the other channels. Now, I should say I've been doing a kind of snapshot of February at the moment, and the picture for Reporting Scotland is massively improved for February the period after my research blew up. I won't claim credit for that necessarily, but the picture for BBC One has dramatically worsened in terms of imbalance, almost like BBC One has entered the fray to present bad news stories. I think the personalisation of the First Minister and the conflation, this was mentioned by journalists at the weekend, the conflation of the Yes agenda with Alex Salmond's personal wishes and his face on screen was disproportionately done. We hardly ever heard the suggestion that Alistair Darling wants this, Alistair Darling wants that, and so on. With due respect, I think both capable of being made into figures of fun by the media, where they had the intention to do so. So I thought that was unbalanced. And also, I think that the kind of respect, the undue respect shown to political organisations like the Office for Budget Responsibility or the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the idea that they are impartial is deeply wrong. And any social scientist will provide you with the evidence that they are also political animals. And their research should be treated with the same caution as research coming, say, from the Scottish Office. I'm in danger of forgetting. These, I think, were the main points, actually, that I thought were...
It's fine, Professor Robertson. We're going to get into some of the detail, I'm sure, when members want to ask questions. I'm going to start the questioning with Claire Adamson.
Good morning, Professor, and thank you very much for your opening statement. We've all taken on board your comments regarding what has happened to you since the publication of your report.
In the interim as well.
I did know that.
So I did think it was delayed. It took months and months, and I thought, have I shot myself in the foot there? But my new principal is Australian. He doesn't give a forex about any of this, I don't think.
My question's about the methodology that you used in your research, and I note from your written evidence you say the coding which led to the evidence of bias emerged from a grounded theory, phenomenological, and you would get that wrong, approach which allows the data to speak. Can you enlighten us about where this methodology has been used before, and
it's long-standing in the social. It's long-standing in the social sciences. By long-standing, I mean as far back as maybe the 70s. Around the time I was an undergraduate, there was beginnings of a shift from a more positivist approach, where rather arrogant social scientists thought they knew what was in the evidence before they went looking for it. Now, I should say, and this is not crawling here, but feminist methodology has been very influential in this, and there's been a strong suggestion that the move towards a more qualitative approach, which allows the evidence to emerge rather than the evidence being selected, it derives from a shift, a greater presence of women in social science research. It's clearly not perfect. It's clearly not perfect, but it's an intention. Ian Bell, the only journalist who's really mentioned my research at all, Ian Bell commented on the fact that I was committed, and he agreed to fairness and self-awareness. Now, there's a lot of talk about journalism educators, about balance, about bias, and so on. And these are all very subjective areas. I think you can't really achieve them. What you can do is have the really good intention to be self-aware of yourself all the time, and to look and to be fair to the evidence, not to be going in with preconceptions. Sorry, very long answer.
and just can you give us an indication? I know you've submitted it, but in what period of time was the research conducted by yourself?
The first block is September to September in the first year of the period since the announcement of the referendum date. I'm currently working on the second year, and I think I mentioned before, someone asked me, given that, you see, one of the problems with this was that mostly I published in peer-reviewed journals which would largely encourage you to stay well away from politics. It's a rather sad fact that intellectuals have become quite detached from politics, to my mind, and I think there's a place for some kind of engagement, as long as it's an intelligent engagement. Now, I was urged by Scottish Affairs to sit on the whole thing until it was finished. That struck me as pointless in some way, because I didn't come in here to actually... What I was hoping to do was actually improve coverage. Improve. Not necessarily... I didn't think I would necessarily shift it one way or the other, but I thought maybe, rather naively, I thought the BBC's Department of whatever, self-improvement, if there is one, that they might have actually looked at this and thought, interesting, let's invite him along for a chat about it. But they just reported me to the principal. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yes, you did answer my question. And if I could just return to your opening statement, just finally, you talked about your academic colleagues and the reaction of the BBC to your research. Are you aware of the BBC having this level of criticism and involvement on any other research in Scotland?
No, I haven't. It's, there's an online blog which is at the moment comparing me with Professor Curtis at Strathclyde. Now, I'm not going to say anything offensive to Professor Curtis, obviously, but one of the commentators said, "I'll explain it to you," he said. "Professor Curtis is Premier League. This Robertson guy is playing in the reserves at Elgin City." There's that kind of thing is happening in the background, that there are huge bodies of research which are not being questioned. Now, Professor Curtis's research, and I can say this without being insulting to him, is based on sampling. He and his team sample maybe 1,000 people to represent the electorate of Scotland. How many million? Reduced to 1,000. That introduces massive potential for distortion. And I think you can see that in the ineffectiveness of polling over a long period of time. I did no selection. That's one of the reasons I'm quite angry, is I did no selection, I did it all. I took all of the broadcasting from 6 till 7 for the whole year. I didn't select it, because if you start to select, then obviously people can say, "Oh, you missed something." You know, you just happened unluckily to choose the bad news.
Thank you.
Joan?
A quick supplementary on your methodology. What kind of research have you done in the past? Is this the first time you've looked at Scottish politics?
It's the first time. My interest is in. My interest is in thought control in democracies. Everyone knows in a totalitarian state you can't trust the media. Everybody knows they're being lied to. Thought control in totalitarian states is totally ineffective, because the entire population pretty much don't trust that stuff from the party. In democracies there is thought control. There's undeniably thought control. Media and political elites often work in each other's interests. They don't get round a big cauldron. Let's do down the working classes and send our boys off to die because we want them to do that. They just mix. They go to the same schools. Their children go to the same schools. They share the same interests, the same cultural interests. So we do end up with a degree of thought control without conspiracy, through self-censorship, where members of elites act in their own interests and therefore in the interests of that elite. Now, I've done research for many years now into media coverage of war, of the economy. This is the first piece of research I've ever done that's attracted any interest. It's all in academic journals with, the occasional postgraduate student writing to me, and I think, oh, at least I've influenced one person with this. Most of it, I think, was more controversial than this. This just happened because of the time, I guess. I've been a bit naive. I just finished a piece of research on the coverage of the BBC, the TV coverage of the cabin crew strike. Remember the cabin crew strike at British Airways and so on? I thought that would be interesting because of the gender dimension to all of that. That cabin crew are quite different from rail crew, for example. Now, that was the thing. I just finished it. My contract expects me to produce research and to have that submitted for review. And I looked around and thought, what would be interesting right now? Really. I just thought that. And when I published it, I was really quite surprised at the email from Mr. Small at the BBC. It really quite took me off guard. That's maybe naivety. I may be slightly autistic. I do a lot of quantitative stuff, and I think maybe I've got a slightly autistic streak there that I don't pick up political always. Sorry, again a long answer.
Liam MacArthur.
Good morning, Professor Robertson. Reading with interest the report you've provided to the committee, and with your opening remarks there, you were drawing attention to what you saw as the conflation of the First Minister and his views and perspectives on independence with somehow a line of attack that was unique to those seeking to retain the Union. Would you say that there's a similar tendency by the First Minister and by the Yes campaign more broadly to characterise the Union as somehow to do with David Cameron, George Osborne, posh Southern Tories, whatever you will. And so, in a sense, what you're seeing is an echo on both sides of a personalisation of politics, which is going which is going on across all elections in all political contests.
I can only again talk to the period I surveyed. And in the period I surveyed, and I will admit it wasn't across the whole year, it was particularly in the first 6 months, was the intensity of what I would see as demonisation of the First Minister. It reminded me very strongly of how Michael Foot, many of you may be a bit young for Michael Foot and Neil Kinnock were treated by the media, made fool of, so as to associate a fool with a political stance. Now, I think, I don't know because I haven't done the data yet, but I think George Osborne has been picked out in quite a similar way recently. And I think, to be fair, I think the Scottish media have been quite keen to jump on George Osborne. We've seen Bernard Ponsonby shouting at him, and everybody no doubt cheering at that. So I think there may be a truth in that, but in the period I covered, a very, very heavy imbalance. Hardly ever was there a suggestion that Joanne Lamont wanted anything. And yet, again, the potential to demonise Joanne Lamont just as easy as the potential to demonise Alex Salmond.
Does that not throw up a possible problem with the way in which you approach the research, in that the association with, I would say particularly David Cameron, with what was happening in relation to reform of welfare and other difficult decisions being taken at the UK level, was being conflated with the independence debate, and in very much the same way as Alex Salmond was being conflated with.
It wasn't in that year.
It was that.
It was, but it just wasn't in that year. I remember again, my commitment is to record what is there, and that tendency was much weaker than the tendency to commonly associate Alex Salmond with everything, and to open with Alex Salmond this and Alex Salmond that.
I'd be very surprised if between September 2012 and September 2013 there wasn't extensive coverage at UK and at Scottish level about welfare reform and attacks by Alex Salmond and SNP ministers about what was happening in terms of welfare reform, or indeed in terms of cuts to budgets to deal with the economic crisis.
Welfare reform, the way a welfare reform story is presented might not be directly concerned with the referendum.
Well, I mean,
you could. I appreciate you could take it that way.
Yeah, well, in a sense, you then refer to in the report here health-related matters, and obviously health is a matter entirely devolved to the Scottish Parliament. So I'm not entirely sure what the point is that's being made here in relation to reports of issues of a health-related nature with regards to the referendum.
Well, I think I agree there is a subjective decision to be made in looking at this material and deciding where to put it. And I'm open to the suggestion that someone else, another team, would come along and move things about a bit. I don't think they'd make a big difference. I suspect that if you were to bring in fairly naive undergraduates of the kind that I know BBC have recruited in some number recently, and who were directed with a view to destruction of my research, that probably if they did this with the raw data, they'd probably come out with more bias, I would think, against the BBC.
But frankly, the point that has been made in relation to welfare reform dating back to the election in 2010 has been sometimes implicitly, very often explicitly, that under an independent Scotland, all of this would be done very differently. So actually the reporting of that is material to where there may be seen to be balance or bias within the reporting of political issues.
What I'm saying is what I found, and that's what I found in that period. Now, I don't want to comment on gut feelings about what I'm thinking at the moment, because I'm holding back until it's time to look at the material. But I suspect that you may be correct that there has been an increased tendency to associate Cameron and Osborne with particular initiatives as people, and to demonise the whole thing by consequence. In that year, there wasn't. But again, maybe you could dig up some examples and send them to me, and I can go and have a look back at it. And if I've missed it, I'll admit it.
Okay, I'll come back in.
Happy to bring you back in, but other members waiting. Jane Baxter.
Thanks, Convener. Morning, Professor Robertson. It's my view that in life we often see things as we are and not as they are. And so I'd like to ask you whether you accept that in research studies, coding of language is subjective, and that a person's worldview, their understanding of life and their views will have an impact on their decisions about language, and you are as susceptible to that as anybody else. And I'm wondering how impartial you think you've been able to be in this process.
I'd agree entirely until the point at which you said I'm susceptible. I've spent 30 years trying to be less susceptible and immersing myself in procedures that constrain me. So I don't think my performance is the same as the average person. It sounds tremendously elitist, I know, but it's been my job for 30 years. I do agree. All research into politics, social, economic factors and so on, you can present that research. I mean, I've been looking at some of the other papers presented to you for later this morning. I could jump all over quite a lot of that stuff if you wanted me to. And I think so I admit to that. So what puzzles me is, given that potential to have a critique and to have a debate, why didn't the BBC report it? Why didn't the Guardian report it, or the Herald, or why didn't anybody report it and then find a professor who disagrees with me and call me in and have me debate it with them? Why did they just suppress it? And I think it's because I think in the end there was a feeling it couldn't be, because they can't pin me down to membership of anything. They can't pin me down to alignment. You've suggested I'm human, which thanks. I'm a bit autistic, which makes me, I think, a bit more, more suited to this kind of thing than normal humans. I've wandered a bit there. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. George Adam.
Okay.
Good morning, Professor Robertson. I know your principal, Craig Mahoney, quite well, because he's obviously based in Paisley, so I was meeting him not so long ago, and I know exactly what he's like with these attitudes towards things. But I want to talk about, when you mentioned about, during in your written evidence and again, basically the personalisation of Alex Salmond, the First Minister, during that year period. You mentioned Michael Foot and Neil Kinnock, and they're a perfect example of how the media went out of their way to actually just go play the man and not the ball, effectively. And basically, I'd like to, some of the examples you've got here is that you've got down here in Reporting Scotland on the 23rd of the 10th, Alex Salmond under pressure. The same show on the 23rd of the 10th, 12, Willie Rennie challenges Alex Salmond's policy. And in the 25th of the 10th last year at 12th, Report Scotland's got Salmond as described by Joanne Lamont as a straight as a corkscrew, and then compared to Ruth Davison to bent salesman Del Boy. Now, these hardly seem like things that are going to be quite fair and open. And I look at your figures as well that you've got in your chart here, where it says personalisation of ideas, 35 for Alex Salmond, and personalisation of ideas is better together individuals, and you've broadened it out to take everyone else, absolutely 0. Now, does that not show, I would say that's quite an important part of your findings here, is that the debate is going down. If we're wanting to make the debate better, if we want to actually have that engagement with the public, we have to move away from this personalisation of the actual process.
I'm not a political scientist, I'm a media researcher, so I could agree with you, but I don't really feel tremendously expert on what should be done. I think that the media in a democracy should be open, should be open and self-critical. And I don't think, and that's what angers me most, is I think it's not self-critical. I think it's rather closed and cosy.
But just taking the figures on their own, like 35 to 0, that just seems.
Mind you, that's out of hundreds of messages, so you could argue it's quite a small percentage. If I were to take the other perspective, I'm not suggesting that in itself. I'm not suggesting anything about impact here. I did hint a little at there is some hard research evidence that bad news sticks, and bad news may affect voters. Bad news about the economy in particular does. It's not so clear, for example, whether the representation of Alex Salmond. My mum dislikes Alex Salmond very strongly. I don't know why, and I think it's just she just dislikes the way he is. And I think it's a lot to do with what she's seen and the way he's presented. So it may be that's had an impact. I don't know what she was like before the campaign. But again, see, were this the Crimea, we'd say, okay, pass, not bad, reasonably balanced. It's not really extreme, you have to say. This is by far the most civilised process in the world in terms of the attempt to separate one country from another. It's incredibly polite. And this research suggests the 3-to-2 ratio, I think, is of almost no significance. I think it's the respect for certain allegedly independent agencies, and it's the presentation of individuals that really counts. On
that, can I just ask, you mentioned some of the stuff that has no academic substance or value that's been part of the debate. Statements are made that just have no backing. Like some of the examples you give here is on the 5th of the 10th, 12, Report Scotland said the Scottish Government's commitment to universal benefits was immediately followed by the reference spending watchdog chief Robert Black, who has questioned whether such benefits are affordable and reinforced the reference to Mr Black's CV. Now, I see that as an example of how some certain things are said and just left to hang there during the debate without actually doing anything.
Debate about whether or not Mr Black's CV is important. I suppose because I've played a similar card when I said that I'm not subject to subjectivity because of my training. I suppose you could argue that his CV gives him a certain entitlement to speak. I just think that if there are too many of those, it leads to a kind of imbalance. And I think there's a tendency of, I've not been treated with particular respect, far less than Professor Curtis. And I don't think I should be treated with enormous respect.
One of the examples you actually give is probably an example you've been dragged into this because of your research, but effectively you've been told that you're like the equivalent of not a Premier League player, but Elgin City Reserves, which I take offence to because my wife's family's from Elgin.
I'm actually a Falkirk fan as well.
But one of the other things you've got here is a perfect example is in the 26th of the 4th report in Scotland, a general negative assessment of the future of insurance companies after independence finished with the line from a Labour spokesperson saying billions in cost, potential closures, and there's no actual substance behind all of that. There's no, it seems to be very one-sided. The Yes campaigns ask for give us answers, give us definites, and it seems to be just kind of fluffy lines at the end, billions it will cost.
Journalists will often say they're working under, and they are working under pressure of deadlines, and a lot of what they do, they will say isn't. I mean, I don't think what they do is a conspiracy as such. I think if journalists over a period of time produce an imbalance, I think that's partly random, and I think it's partly to do with their subconscious preferences, that they do that without really planning to. I don't think it's malevolent in any way.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. Can I also defend Elgin City? And can I just remind you that Inverness, Caledonia, Thistle and Ross County were in the Highland League, and look where they are now. But I have to do that because I'm a Highland MSP.
Of course.
Right.
Due respect.
Professor Robertson, can I ask you, do you favour independence for Scotland?
Yes.
Yeah. So you favour independence for Scotland, and I have a quote here which says that you do, and I favour Scotland remaining part of a United Kingdom. So when I watch the same television broadcast as you watch, I tend to be more sensitive to comments, as Liam MacArthur has mentioned, about David Cameron, about George Osborne, really about any Conservative, and including my leader, Ruth Davidson. Whereas, would I be right in saying that because you favour independence, you are probably more sensitive to comments that are anti-independent?
Well, I've made reference to being slightly artistic, but I can't deny some kind of humanity and therefore weakness in that. And I've made it very clear that there is always subjectivity, and the way to deal with subjectivity in a democracy is to report it, and argue about it, not to hide it. Not to hide it because it's bad news. Yes. So I would agree with you. Can I just say, though, however, although I favour independence, I favour independence for reasons many reasons which wouldn't allow me to join the SNP, for example. If we're going to, I believe researchers should surface themselves. There was a belief in the past that researchers should hide themselves, and teachers were encouraged to do the same. Hide who you are, otherwise you contaminate everything. My belief is if you actually surface who you are, you tell more. I would say that I'm primarily a socialist. I would put that before. I'm not a nationalist in that sense. I'm a socialist. I'd probably put in second position pacifist. So NATO is anathema to me. In third position, I'd say feminist. I think the abuse of women in Scottish society is an enormous scandal. You might even argue it should be the first place thing to be dealt with. It's horrific, the treatment of women in this country. And in other countries, obviously. So I'd put those three probably before any interest in independence. I've got this feeling that small countries tend to be more democratic, tend to be less likely to be imperialist states. I'm also an anti-imperialist. I condemn the history of the British Empire. It cannot be rewritten. The British Empire was a massive protection racket which brutalised enormous parts of the world. And in 100 years' time, historians will probably be hard pushed to say which was worst, the Soviet Union or the British Empire, once it's all out in the open. So I'm an anti-imperialist. So you see the nationalism is way down the line there.
Well,
I'm a nationalist because I think the Danish seem to do it quite well. So I'd quite like to be like them. Sorry,
you've actually just completed the quote that you previously gave. I'm a socialist, pacifist, feminist and anti-imperialist, and the latter position inevitably means I do favour independence for Scotland.
For small countries.
But could I just, as an academic before, for 20 years before coming in here, but I lectured economics as opposed to your topic.
Miserable science.
Can I just say, Professor Robertson, would it be fair to say that another researcher in your shoes with, you know, my thoughts, my views, my values about favouring Scotland remaining in a United Kingdom would be able to interpret the same information in a different way? But because you favour independence in Scotland, and you've confirmed that today, which is fine. And obviously in a democracy, I welcome your views. I think the views of academics are as important as any views expressed in this Parliament. I feel that very strongly. But do you think another researcher looking at the same information could have come forward with a different conclusion if they favoured Scotland remaining in a United Kingdom?
There's a to a point. Again, I'm going to make this arrogant claim for exceptionalism. I think if a researcher has been at it for 30 years, and if they use grounded theory, and if they're committed to allowing evidence to emerge as modern researchers are, I don't think they could have come out of this evidence with a hugely different picture. In fact, I would argue, you see, I did this, I've referred to multiple phases of coding. You can't just collect all the stuff and code it once, because what you see as you code changes how you might have coded what was earlier. So I coded it twice. It's a big task. It takes absolutely ages. I coded it twice. The first time through, I came out with a stronger imbalance against the Yes campaign. A stronger imbalance. And I went back through again and I thought, and I looked at sentences and I thought, I think that still is. I think that still is a pro-no statement, but it's not so obvious. And somebody else might disagree with me. And I dropped them. And so the category, which is where everything else goes, grew bigger on the second. So, but I have to agree that in the end, that you know that I come with baggage, and I can't entirely escape it. But I've done my level best.
We all come with baggage. Can I just say that the BBC have said that you singularly failed to define fairness and insulting language, and it really is what may be unfair to you may be fair to me, and insulting language could be subjective. Is that reasonable?
There were very few examples of that. You have to say they were very. I mean, in terms of the number of messages.
They were looking for your definition. They said you failed to give a definition.
You're right. I didn't give a definition. I used examples, and the examples that it's George gave earlier. They were almost entirely from Joanne Lamont, aimed at Alex Salmond. Almost entirely, not entirely. Sometimes from your own leader, which would be something straight as a corkscrew. I don't think there's any ambiguity in that. That's an insult.
Just my final question, Convener. Can I also refer to it's out of paper, page number 5, and it's the examples that you've mentioned. The first one is on Scots savers and financial institutions might be at risk. I mean, we've discovered this week that EU legislation mean that financial organisations such as Royal Bank of Scotland, etc., they have to be based in the area where the majority of their customers are. So, you know, there is uncertainty, and George Adam rightly mentioned things are hanging in the air, and I agree with that. But do you appreciate that many people out there are concerned? There are big questions to ask. And the other one you mentioned is the subsidy for renewables, at the moment the subsidy falls on a United Kingdom-wide population. Yeah. The subsidy would fall on 2 million households for renewables. Do you understand that these are talking points, and at the moment, because there's no pre-negotiation, there are no answers?
I do understand that. I should say that, I mean, you'll be far more knowledgeable than I am about what's happening.
So.
Well, no, with regard to the politics, yeah. I'm only interested in the representation of the politics.
Oh, you've used these examples.
And I mean, well, I agree. I agree that's selection. I agree that's subjective.
Yes.
I'm just saying, but they were examples. I'm not saying they're true or false. I'm saying these are bad news examples, and I'm saying there were lots of bad news examples. I'm not for a minute suggesting that anybody was wrong in what they said there.
Is it not
I'm just
fair
saying they were
for
presenting bad news.
Is it not fair for the BBC and others to be part of this debate and to highlight risks where and uncertainty where they feel they exist? Is that not an obligation on behalf of the freedom of the press that they have to do in a democracy?
Sure, but they do have, and one of the reasons the BBC were so angry, or the head of policy was so angry with me, is because the BBC have a charter where they're committed to fair. No, well, fairness is not the word they use, of course, but they're committed to impartiality. And so if they're reporting negative stories more than positive stories, that opens them to the suggestion of impartiality.
A number of members who want to come in, so I'm going to take it in the order that I'm going to bring in members who have not spoken first. So I'm going to bring in Neil, and then Colin, and then others.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Professor Robertson. We heard just there you're in favour of Scottish independence. Is it your belief, stated publicly, that you think the Labour Party is fatally corrupt?
Have I said
hold on a second, Mr. Robertson, hold on a second. We are asking Professor Robertson about his views with regard to his research. His personal views, and I did allow the question from Mary Scanlon because I can see the relevance of it, but we are not going to get into a personalisation situation here, Mr. Bibby. So if you want to ask, well, I'm going to, if you want to ask questions about the research, then that's fine, but we're not going to get into that area.
There's a quote from an interview I think you gave to Open Democracy where you said there are good people in the BBC. Mindless loyalty to now a fatally corrupt Labour Party is not uniform.
I don't think I should have said that last bit. I think the first bit I should have said, because I'm not having a go at the BBC. I'm not having a go at anybody, except defensively now because they had a go at me, and I don't see why I should take it lying down. I think the fatally corrupt Labour Party thing was inappropriate. Okay. I regret saying it.
If you're using the phrase fatally corrupt, do you still believe that BBC employees are loyal to the Labour Party?
I don't know. I think Kirsty Work is.
Where is your evidence for that?
We're jumping all over Alex Salmond on television every opportunity she could get. Anyway, we're kind of wandering off this research into my personal views.
I mean,
or is that because you think that undermines the research?
Well, I think you know, your view appears to be that okay, you've retracted what you said about the Labour Party being corrupt, but
no, I haven't retracted it. I've regretted it.
Okay, so you
I don't retract it. No.
Okay, so you.
Sorry, look, I'll give you a
little
more
time.
I really don't want... I mean, we have got a limited amount of time, and Professor Robertson's here to talk about his research that he has published. If we can stick to that, then I'm more than happy to take questions from you, Mr. Bibby, but let's stick to the research.
In a sense, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm a socialist and a pacifist. That means there's virtually no mainstream political party I can hold in high respect in this country. Okay, none of them. None of them.
My last question in this line was, to just sum up the point, when it comes to accusations of political bias, you're not a neutral observer, are you?
Political bias? Who have accused of political bias?
When it comes to your
I haven't accused anybody of political bias. I've condemned the reaction to my research as undemocratic and as unfair and unethical. I think would be probably appropriate. I haven't condemned anybody in the research at all. I've observed something which I thought might be of interest.
Well, I thought the line mindlessly loyalty to now fatally corrupt
That's
Labour
not in my
Party
research, is it?
That was part of an interview you did with Open Democracy. But
I agree. That was, you know, you say things in interviews. You'll have said things in interviews.
I think that was an interview you did following your research.
Sorry, I'm going to stop this now because this is about the research that Professor Robertson has published. I'm not going to get into a personality spat between members of this committee and witnesses. If you want to ask questions, and it's any member, about the research, then please do so. But we're not going to get into attacks on individuals about their personal views, which are nothing to do with the research that they've published. Colin, please. Colin Beattie.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is very brief. I notice you refer to phase 1 of your survey. I presume that refers to the period from September 2012 to 2013. Is phase 2 then the next year? Yes, it is. Yeah. And that is going ahead?
That's currently underway, but I'm not looking at it. And also, I mean, you mentioned things happening in politics. I'm trying to kind of stay back a bit from engagement because I really do value the role of the researcher, and I acknowledge I will let slip gut feelings and emotional viewpoints and so on. I've admitted to being human in that respect, but I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best to hold back. So therefore, the whole 2-year survey. Plus, of course, a review of literature and references. I was given a row for not enough references, so I think I only got a C for my essay. That will appear in a book, which is already in a chapter. It will be in a chapter in a book with other media academics, including those I've condemned today for not supporting me.
The second point I wanted to make was I was very interested in where you were discussing evidence from sources other than the political parties, purporting to be independent or whatever, or I think you referred also to academic or scientific. And you mentioned the Office of Budget Responsibility Institute of Fiscal Studies, which are very frequently, in my mind, used to support evidence that's put forward. And yet you made the statement, notably, there was very little use of such evidence in the reporting overall.
Maybe this is a slightly teacherly sort of reaction to it. You know, I do kind of, you know, online debates with students, postgraduate students and so on, and if they're not making heavy use of evidence and references, then they're slammed for that. And I thought in this very important political debate, I just thought it would seem quite rare for any kind of academic to appear, apart from one or two regular pet. And obviously I'm not a pet. I don't know whether I come across, am I a bull terrier academic or something? I don't know. It seemed to me not very much, given all the statements, lots of statements of opinion by political editors. You know, Brian Taylor over and over again saying what he thinks, and yet hardly a professor or another academic saying what they think about similar things.
I find it interesting because, as I said, in my mind, it seems to be very frequent that these references are made, and yet you've actually done the count. And you're saying there is very little use.
Do you mean some of the recent? I mean, there's been a run recently, I think, hasn't there, of chief executives saying things? Is that what you mean?
No. I'm specifically thinking about the examples you gave, the IFS and the OBR. Yeah. Because they seem to be for a long time now, they seem to have been very frequently mentioned in the press. You know, to support often.
Bear in mind, it's only the television coverage I did. I mean, the press coverage would be another matter. They'd have more time, I suppose, more space. Yeah. But I mean, I can only say that's what I found. Yeah. That's what I found. I did my best to let it be found. And
interesting anomaly. Thank you.
Thank you. Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Convener. Professor Robertson, you started by, I think, framing the research in your interest in the issue of censorship of the media. And George Adam earlier referred to the comment in relation to the report in Scotland from October 2012, where Watchdog Chief Robert Black has questioned the affordability of the Scottish Government's commitment to universal benefits. His CV gives him an entitlement to speak, I think, is what you said. Well, he's the Auditor General. Or he was the Auditor General, and therefore, if concerns he was raising, and auditors tend to speak in terms of concerns and raising questions rather than giving endorsements, generally speaking, that if he were not being quoted and that story were not being reported by Report in Scotland, do you think that would be a greater concern?
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, regardless, I mean, I do agree if someone has a CV in a certain area, that we should be interested in what they have to say. But
he has a statutory role.
Well, the CV, sorry, CV is the evidence of his. Oh, you mean his current role?
But no, he's now demitted that office. But his role was a statutory role. In terms of
he doesn't have that role just now, you're saying.
He's no longer.
So his CV is accurate, I think I'm saying. If I say CV, and that's what it is, it's not his current role.
Right, but he would have been being interviewed on the basis of the concerns he expressed
his previous
for
role.
his Auditor General. Yeah,
and I would refer you to your colleague over here that he too will be subject to bias and to baggage and so on. The fact that he's that's we're all human. Why no?
All human is a fairly reasonable statement.
That's a fairly reasonable statement, but we're into I think fairly dangerous realms if we're impugning the reputation of
impugn anyone. I impugn that he's human, that he may bring certain perspectives to bear. The point is that
his role as Auditor General, with respect, is to question and highlight areas where whether it's further answers or clarity needs to be provided, or whether the figures that have been presented don't necessarily add up in the way that
but he's a political animal like all other people involved in this. He will be political too. Now, I don't know this. I don't know anything about him. But Reporting Scotland, I don't think the other channels mentioned them. I don't think STV mentioned them that night. So you seem to be implying that this has to be paid attention to. This particular statement has to be done. But journalists choose. And sometimes they choose the Chief Executive, BP, or Shell, or whatever, and the other channel doesn't. And sometimes they choose different ones. I'm not arguing with the veracity of anything being said. I'm arguing about the overall picture.
And simply because the Auditor General has sought to raise questions about an approach that the government is taking in one area, that somehow is a reflection of inherent political bias in the Auditor General.
I haven't said that at all.
Well,
I haven't said anything like that. And if you were to read what I've written there, what I've said is that's an example. It's an example of bad news. And it was an example of bad news contradicted. It was an example of bad news treated with deference. That's just an objective statement. I'm not saying it shouldn't have been.
But there seems to be an implication that because we're going through a process leading up to the referendum in September this year, that every issue, however it's perceived, if a negative perspective is taken on it, somehow this is part of an anti-independence approach. I mean, I would encourage you to watch much of the reporting of the UK government by the BBC, and one could equally say that is a pro-independence approach, in that it plays into the argument that Alex Salmond and others within the Yes campaign are trying to prosecute.
You're kind of setting me up as some kind of political scientist of sorts, which I'm not. I'm a media researcher, and I have just described something that happened, and I've thought it was fair to code that as an anti-independence statement, one that would worry people who are voting for yes. And it was presented without being countered, and it was presented as if it were of unquestionable high status. I'm not saying it wasn't. How would I know? I mean, I know nothing about what his area of expertise. I think I just, without really having any emotions about it, I just looked at it and thought, negative. It's a negative. It's an uncontradicted negative, and it's a deference approach to the whole thing. What's wrong with that?
The fact that Auditor Generals have been raising questions about governments of all political views, that is their role.
Should he be
Can
I move you on to...
General, just before we move on, can I just clarify? Perhaps you can help us here, Professor Robertson. Was Bob Black, at the time of that statement, the Auditor General or the former Auditor General?
I don't remember, but former, I think. I'd have to check my records.
So I think he probably was the former Auditor General. You keep repeating that he was Auditor General. I don't think he was at the time. We can clarify that.
Right. No, I think
there's clearly a difference. It creates a different impression if he's Auditor General.
To be fair to Liam, I think he admitted that at some point. He was unsure.
In terms of your written evidence to the committee, you've referred to it on a couple of occasions here this morning. You seem to draw a link between both the OBR but also the Institute of Fiscal Studies with the UK government and other government departments. Could you explain in particular the Institute of Fiscal Studies link to the UK government and government?
Well, I've known of the Institute for Fiscal Studies in previous research, and I know that they are aligned with a particular view of economics, which is neoliberal. And I think to describe themselves as impartial is inaccurate, because they are a political movement also. They may not see themselves as such. Now, this is not me coming at this from the point of view of someone with a view on independence. This is my view of the intellectual world and the impartiality of the intellectual world. There are far too many agencies in this world try to present themselves, the World Bank for whatever, who try to present themselves as somehow outside of ideology. And I think that's wrong. And I think the Office for Budget Responsibility, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, are clearly aligned with certain ways of thinking which are political. I'm not. I'm not saying we shouldn't be listening to them at all. I'm just saying that here were examples. Here were examples of bad news coming from organisations presenting themselves as impartial, and I cast a little doubt on whether any of these organisations are impartial.
So then, when the First Minister, for example, quotes favourably the Institute of Fiscal Studies where it is critical of the UK government, he is misguided in that role. And John Swinney, who is talking about the establishment of an equivalent of the OBR in Scotland, is misguided in that approach. Again,
you're turning me a professor of politics. I'm just observing what was there. I'll leave you to draw the conclusions as to whether anything should be done about it, or whether it was politically. I've tried to describe what's there as coldly and as impartially as I can, and the fact that I have become in favour of independence for Scotland, I think is, I don't know, should I have just kept quiet about that? I don't know, just said nothing at all about it. I've become more so because of the No campaign, I have to say, because of the research has made me slightly more in favour of independence, but it's not a big deal for me. It's not driving me. It absolutely is not driving me. It comes way down the line after pacifism and other issues.
Thank you. And finally, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. I probably should have put on record earlier on, Professor, that I have worked with a number of students from the West of Scotland University. Obviously, we have a campus in my region too, in the Hamilton, and recently had one of the journalism students in work experience in my office. I should also like to put on record, I know Mrs Scanlon gave the example of George Osborne's concerns regarding financial institutions and where they have to be, but I believe that the European Union is actually reviewing those rules at the very moment, and they're unlikely to, from current reports, to be carried forward. I would just like to ask, obviously it's been a very far-reaching discussion this morning, but I do have a sort of fundamental concern, perhaps, about your opening statement and what's happened here. And I wondered if you would be willing to give an opinion on the impact that your academic peer-reviewed research has had on the students at the university, and indeed the reputation of the university, which of course we're very, very proud of in Scotland.
I think it's probably too early to say. When Mao Zedong was asked about the lessons to be drawn from the French Revolution in the 1950s, he said it was too early to say. So I doubt whether, according to the head of policy at the BBC, I've damaged the corporate reputation of UWS. That's why he reported me to the principal, because he thought I may have damaged the corporate reputation. There are other kinds of reputation, of course, apart from corporate. I haven't used this material with students because it's just been this year. I do use my research with students to demonstrate how to do research, but I haven't. This is too recent, so I can't really comment on that.
Thank you, Professor.
I think it'll be mixed. It'll be mixed. There's been a huge amount of online activity, which younger people are more engaged in. Someone suggested to me that the traffic, the number of messages online referring to my research, this is across Twitter and things I don't use, is about 250,000. So the fact that it didn't make the Telegraph or whatever maybe isn't a big deal. Again, I'm being drawn off on to things I shouldn't be talking about.
Thank you very much. Can I just finally, just as we're finishing, ask you a direct question about the research results? You mentioned the 3 to 2 ratio wasn't a headliner for you, if I can put it that way. But across, I mean, I'm looking at the column in your data about the Reporting Scotland and BBC One combined figures. And where there's, in those lines where there's a comparison between the two sides, for example, pro-independence, anti-independence numbers, 211 pro, 317 anti, and then pro-independence academic, 4, anti-23, anti-pro-order, 79, pro-anti-order, 43. We've mentioned some of the other ones, I won't list them all now. But in every single one of these comparison pieces of data, the numbers are greater on the no side than the yes side, in every single one. Yeah. Is it possible over a 12-month period that could happen just by random accident?
I don't think it could happen in a random way. I think it suggests something structural, and I think I explained early on, and I think I have to others, that there was a tendency to allow everyone amongst the major parties to speak. So that there are 3 major no campaigning parties. There's 1 major yes campaigning. So if everyone was being given amongst that group, obviously leaving out the Greens and the Socialists and so on, who are presumably considered too small to be allowed to comment very often, then you might actually have got something like a 3-to-1 ratio, you could see. Often the comments are very short. The Lib Dems would be given barely a sentence. So I think that can lead to an imbalance, which doesn't really matter a huge amount, I don't think. But I don't know, because this is not a study of effects. I haven't interviewed potential voters. I don't know. I'll have to leave that to Professor Curtis to interview.
Okay.
Some voters.
Thank you very much, Professor Robertson, for coming along this morning. We do appreciate you coming in, giving us your evidence and discussing your report. And I'm sure we'll all look forward to your future publication when it's finally completed
when it's all over.
After 2 years. Thank you very much. I want to suspend the meeting briefly to allow the witnesses to change over. Can I welcome our second panel of witnesses this morning, all from BBC Scotland, who will give evidence on broadcasting. We have Ken McQuarrie, John Boothman, Bruce Malcolm and John Mullen. Welcome to all of you. Can I thank the witnesses for their further written evidence on BBC Scotland's preparations for the referendum and the Commonwealth Games. And can I start the questioning with a question from myself? I presume you've heard the evidence this morning from Professor Robertson, who's just left, and obviously you've responded as an organisation to his research. Could you tell us, Mr McQuarrie, why you took the view that it was necessary to respond in the way you did to Professor Robertson's evidence, his research?
Yes, I can. I think, first of all, to put in relation to Professor Robertson's report, it would be worth just putting a couple of points on the record, Convener. So just saying a few things about the report. We read the report with some interest, but we have some serious concerns with it. And these pertain in particular to elements of its methodology and to its factual accuracy, its findings and its conclusions. In all of these areas, we believe the report displays fundamental errors, and it is for this reason that we question its validity, and our concerns are detailed within our report, which we understand has been distributed to committee members. When the report was first published on a website, it was not sent to us for comment. We were alerted to it by concerned members of the public, but even on a cursory examination we could see errors in it, and we contacted the author, copying the university, given that it had been published with the university's logo appended. It was entirely proper, to my mind, that we did so, and the content and the tone of our communication was also entirely proper. We asked if we might see the raw data, as we did not recognise the evidence presented in the report as an accurate reflection of our broadcast output, and the request was rejected by the report author. What the report does make clear is that its evidence base was a series of transcripts of broadcast output. We are not, unfortunately, in a position to say how accurate those transcripts were. However, given the number of factual errors in the report, it is at least fair to ask the question. We are aware that the version of the report presented to the committee differs from that originally published in January by the author, with one or two of the errors we pointed out now corrected. That said, the vast majority of them remain. In the original research, it is claimed that it is the weekday bulletins that are the focus. We pointed out that the report's own figures were therefore out by over 200 hours. In this latest version, I see it now claims that all the weekend bulletins were considered, and that the figures have been revised down by around 100 hours, from 730 hours to approximately 640. It seems that the author is unclear about what or how much news is covered in the report, and it's on that basis that the entire report is predicated. The report does make a number of allegations about our news coverage, as it does about STV. We completely reject those allegations, as we do the questioning of our journalists in terms of both their professionalism and what they've brought to air. The evidence it presents does not support the contentions it makes, and its conclusions are based largely on flawed analysis or occasionally intuitive guesswork. It is not a piece of analysis based on empirical research, as it claims to be, but rather a highly subjective and selective assessment of our news coverage. It's important, I believe, for the committee to note that the BBC is governed by the requirements of our editorial guidelines and Ofcom's broadcasting code. It is against this criteria that our impartiality is judged. And we are entirely confident that not one of these examples would have fallen foul of the criteria employed there. I would also note that we do take full cognizance of sound analytical broadcasting research, such as from Seesaw to Wagon Wheel report on impartiality published in 2007 and Professor King's report published the following year. Now, I have to say, our questions are not with Professor Robertson simply The report is published on the website of the University of the West of Scotland, and we welcome all contributions to the debate, but we feel it's important that where there are errors of fact, that we make that clear.
Thank you for that comprehensive response, Mr Macquarie. Can you tell me how many pieces of academic research, I'm sure you'll have to guess this if you can, how many pieces of academic research in a normal year, a normal 12-month period would BBC Scotland cover?
How many people?
How many?
Almost, I can't give you an exact figure as to how many we cover, but clearly in our news broadcasts we feature a whole number of different pieces of academic research.
It's a lot, isn't it? I mean, it's a regular occurrence on almost a daily basis.
I couldn't give you an exact figure for it.
Yes. Can you tell me on how many occasions you expended BBC resources on, to be polite about it, tearing apart any pieces of these academic research and reporting that research to the principal of the institution from which the research comes?
Well, first of all, this piece of academic research was about our output, and we're simply not, our desire is not to tear it apart, simply to put on the record where there are factual errors. In terms of reporting it to the principal, we copied, as it was on the principal's, the University of the West of Scotland, we copied the principal. That seemed to me perfectly reasonable to do. I don't see it in any sense as a piece of academic research, which is always welcome in the debate that we're involved in, as reporting. I couldn't see.
About this research. I mean, we know what you did with this research. What I'm asking about is in all of the many hundreds of other bits of research, academic research that you report every year, can you name the number of occasions where you did a similar thing?
No, in general terms, I can't name a specific instance where we would have copied the principal in a piece of academic research. What we do in our journalism is test and debate and discuss that academic research on a regular basis. And Professor Robertson, on the aforementioned research, was given the opportunity on Good Morning Scotland to put his views.
So can I just be clear on what you're saying? So the answer would be none at all?
Not to my knowledge.
Right, so this is the only one where this has happened?
To my knowledge.
To my knowledge.
As we currently stand.
Yeah. Don't you find it rather peculiar, wouldn't an ordinary person looking at this find it rather peculiar, that the BBC accept academic research day in, day out, respond to that by publishing stories on it, having debates on that research, but on this one occasion, when the research is about your own output, that's not how you respond in an entirely different way?
I don't think it's peculiar in the slightest. We wanted to correct the errors of fact, that were in the report, and I think it's perfectly reasonable when it is about our own output, and it was on a question, if you like, of our impartiality, that we would get the facts on the table, and we wrote only to Professor Robertson and copied to the principal.
I'm quite surprised by that answer, because it seems to me, frankly, astonishing that on no other occasion do you expend effort in trying to analyse research that's produced by academics, and you've said so. There's been no occasion to your mind that you've ever done this before, but on this occasion you do spend, seems to me, quite substantial amounts of effort in attempting to discredit the research of Professor Robertson.
We do not wish, we simply wish to ensure that we have registered that the factual base of this research is in fact incorrect, and we wanted to supply example by example for Professor Robertson with the true facts.
Okay, George Adam.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question with regards to, do you get quite a lot of complaints, Ms Macquarie, regarding some of your coverage?
We do get a number of complaints across all of the BBC about our coverage on any given subject, and we also get a lot of plaudits, and we get a lot of comment, which is both neutral and a lot of inquiries. So we've got some a high volume of engagement with the public.
Do you have any actual figures on the number of complaints you receive per year, per annum, per...
The number of contacts would be, in terms of with BBC per annum, would be of the order of 1 million per annum in individual contacts. In terms of breaking them down, can't give you a breakdown at this
to use current affairs and BBC Scotland? No.
At this particular occasion. If you wish, I can supply that to you.
Okay, that'd be interesting.
Mr. Adam, if it's helpful, I would say in the past couple of years, with the onset of the referendum and in relation to some things and stories we have done in relation to Scottish football, there has been a rise in the number of complaints that BBC Scotland has dealt with. We try and answer each individual complaint as promptly as possible.
Okay, thank you for that.
Clarify something. Did you say, Mr Macquarie, that you're willing to supply the committee with the total number of complaints broken down, whether it's football or whether it's to the referendum?
No, we wouldn't be able to do that. But I think we were asking in terms of the generality of the number of contacts we had with the audience in a particular year.
The question was about complaints, though. So, are you able to give us a number of complaints that you received?
We wouldn't normally do so as a matter of course in the BBC, but that's...
But you don't, well, the reason I asked is because, of course, I myself have put a freedom of information request to you and you refused to answer, to tell us the number of complaints that BBC Scotland receives. But I thought you just said you would supply the committee.
No, I said the number of contacts.
So you won't supply this committee with the number of complaints that BBC has received about the referendum coverage?
In terms of specifically about the referendum coverage, no.
No. Why not?
I think that's, in general terms, we use that contact, we reply to each individual complaint, and first of all, the body that would release that information is the BBC Trust rather than the executive, and we would not break it down.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to understand why you wouldn't do that. I mean, clearly, you're a body that's paid for by the public. Surely the public have a right to know about the level of interest or complaints about your output.
And the Trust regularly publish the data about the number of contacts on an annual basis. Yeah,
I'm not asking you about the number of contacts, Mr Macquarie. I'm asking you about the number of complaints you've received from the public about the referendum coverage.
Specifically, we would not break down the complaints into subject-by-subject areas.
Okay. Sorry, Mr Adam.
Just to go on, has there been a cut in the amount of people that are delivering news and current affairs in Scotland, being BBC Scotland at the moment?
I think in the current position that we're in relation to the run-up to the referendum, because of the £5 million of additional investment just to Scotland, there are more people currently working in news and current affairs than I think there have ever been.
So there's more people than there's ever been?
Yeah, because we've added up to about, John, I think nearly 50 staff in the past year to deal with the referendum and all of the additional output that we are providing in the run-up.
Flagship shows like GMS and Reporting Scotland, the main news show, they're actually to get more people working for them.
Yeah, if I can give you some examples of that. You'll have read in the press recently that, for example, Sarah Smith is coming to present a new programme called Scotland 2014 that will start at the end of May, that we're employing the chief reporter from the Herald has recently joined us, a correspondent, an economics correspondent, Coletta Smith from Northern Ireland has joined us. We've got Laura Bicker, who's now been seconded to being a political correspondent. We've got 14 new news trainees. We have more producers coming to join us in order to fulfil the obligations that we have in relation to the extra coverage we want to do. We told the committee the last time we were here that for the period of the referendum, for that fixed period, we would be employing up to 50 additional staff to deal with all of the new output that we propose for the referendum, some of which I'm sure you've already seen. We've had a number of debates and a number of documentaries, as well as beefing up some of the staffing round about some of the programmes.
Mr Boothman, I'm slightly confused, and it may be entirely my own fault in this situation. It might be a permanent state of confusion I live in. But the NUJ have been telling us on numerous occasions that they believe that their staff's under more pressure. We've heard in various media outlets that there's the shift patterns change to such an extent that producers are working through the night and then doing some of the early morning stuff. So if we've got so many people working for BBC Scotland, how are we still getting this from people who are employed in the actual industry then?
At the end of the day, as I say, we've had £5 million of additional investment for the referendum. We're employing, as I said already, up to 50 additional staff. We went through a period until the end of the financial year, the last financial year, where we did make some savings, which resulted in a number of redundancies. But since then, for the period of the referendum, as well as our permanent staff, we've had that additional £5 million and an additional 50 staff.
Mr Boothman, of the 50 additional staff, what is the breakdown? Is it new staff, newly qualified? What is the breakdown?
Well,
John.
Yeah.
So 50 staff have joined the referendum unit. All of those staff are contract, so all the contracts run out at the end of the referendum period. Many of those positions are for documentaries, so they are effectively 3-month contracts. What we've done is we've beefed up online with 4 new employees. We've got probably a dozen or so working on documentaries at any one time, but that's a rolling figure. We have a very gold standard form of training scheme for the trainees. They do 3 months extensive training, and then we put them around different programmes. So some of them are attached to online, some of them are attached to radio, and some of them are attached to TV.
We've got more than we've ever had. Effectively, it's all temporary contracts then. It's all until the referendum's over.
Those 50 are temporary posts, yeah.
Okay then. So effectively, basically in the middle between the two stories is there has been a change in the way you're working, you would say, but the NUJ would say there's been a cut in the amount of journalists that they've got full-time contracts within the BBC in Scotland then.
Mr Boothman and Alan.
Yep. Mr Adam, we have regular meeting with the joint unions on a regular basis discussing the level of staffing. We had, as we indicated, the level of savings at a previous hearing that we had to make. That is due to the extra responsibilities that we have to undertake as part of the current licence fee settlement, which has been for a period of pretty much 7 years will be frozen. We had to make savings in excess of 700 million across the organisation, and we gave full evidence to this committee about that in a previous discussion. With regard to the union, we're working with unions. We've had constructive and positive meetings with the unions, and there's an absolutely open channel. But I absolutely believe that that is a matter for industrial relations between us as the BBC management and the unions and the staff.
Final point, Convener, we're talking about 35 journalists possibly were let go from BBC Scotland full-time, but I've recently seen there's a job application being advertised, public policy officer, and it's between £39,000 and £62,000 a year. Now, it brings it back to my original question, which was effectively about the complaints and the level of complaints, which you said is quite more. Now, I've been led to believe that this post would actually be there to assist someone in dealing with the level of complaints of coming from the general public. Now, do you think after actually changing, you would say changing management structure, the union would probably say the cut of journalist staff at the BBC, do you think it's the right way, the right image, the right thing to put forward that, we're advertising for a job for £39,000 to £62,000 a year, that effectively someone who will just be actually dealing with complaints?
First of all, the post that you mentioned is for a 9-month period. It's a temporary post in what is a huge year for Scotland with the Commonwealth Games, with a whole number of different broadcasters. The Commonwealth Games Broadcasting Conference taking place in Glasgow and Pacific Quay in May. Referendum, whole number of other huge events in which we're heavily involved, not the least of them the centenary of World War I. I deemed it absolutely appropriate that where we have one post in that area, that we supplement that post in this year in terms of workload to ensure that the level of engagement in general between BBC Scotland and all the various bodies that we'll be engaging with is absolutely appropriate, and we're able to sustain that 7 days a week, the 52 over a 52-week period. But we adjudged that we would put in place a 9-month contract. I took the responsibility for that, having looked at all the investments we're making over increased programme output, and also over a highly successful year for BBC Scotland. And I think it's important to note that just in terms of our output, that we recorded our highest ever network television spend in Scotland the last year, with the 11% of BBC network television being made in Scotland, a rise in our network TV hours of over 11%. So I took the decision on that. I take the responsibility for that post. I'm absolutely confident it's the right thing to do.
Ian MacArthur.
Thank you, Convener. Just taking you back to the report by Professor Robertson, could you perhaps indicate the number of academic reports that come to the attention of your journalists which are ignored, which don't get reported?
In terms of the number, I can put a figure on that.
Is, I think, what I'm
So are you talking, Mr MacArthur, about reports about the BBC, right?
Just general reports that are produced by academics.
There are academic reports come to the attention of the BBC and every broadcasting and journalistic organisation all the time. The reporting of them is a matter of editorial judgment, a matter of news values. So that's a... Yeah.
It's fair to say that a large proportion are simply ignored because they don't meet those criteria. Yeah. And as part of those criteria, I think this is probably what you were alluding to there, is there a tendency amongst BBC journalists not to report academic studies where they believe the methodology is flawed or that there is inaccuracies in it, whether to do with the BBC or whether it's to do with any other area of policy? Would that be part of the editorial judgment that's made?
Journalists would make that kind of assessment. You know, what is the methodology in the report? Is the report accurate or otherwise? What techniques have been used in terms of the completion of the report? Are there any errors in the report? What are the conclusions of the report? People would make that assessment before determining whether or not at the end of the day they were going to cover such a report, and that happens on a day and daily basis.
And is it your impression, and can you perhaps evidence this, that the BBC has a reasonable reputation? I think there's always room for improvement. Does it have a reasonable reputation for self-criticism and self-analysis?
I think so, yeah.
Is there any evidence that you can provide to substantiate that?
When in our normal editorial processes, as I've explained, each and every day on each and every story, there are editorial guidelines to be taken into account. Discussions take place day and daily throughout the day, as in any other...
But when stories are about the BBC, does the BBC, in your opinion, and can you perhaps evidence this, does the BBC take a fairly robust line in being self-critical?
I think over the past few months there have been many stories about the BBC, and I think the BBC has proved in recent times up to reporting these stories in a fair and impartial manner. In relation to Professor Robertson's report, I was interested in some of the things he had to say earlier. The report was discussed on phone-in programmes. I certainly heard it, and Mr Robertson was interviewed in Good Morning Scotland.
And in terms of the issue of complaints. I mean, obviously, I've listened with interest to the exchanges with George Adam and also with the convener, although there does appear to be a bit of an inconsistency in the approach there. But in relation to complaints, inevitably, I think in the run-up to the referendum, you would anticipate a closer scrutiny and therefore probably a greater interest in complaining. Have you any way of analysing whether those complaints come from those with a particular agenda to prosecute, or whether they just come from members of the public who are regular listeners or viewers who, it just so happens, are affronted or simply have misgivings about the way in which BBC programming has been conducted?
I think our desire is, and our practice, to respond to each and every complaint on an equivalent basis, no matter what that complaint, and that's our intention, and that's what we're set up to do, and then to make it clear to the complainants what the next steps that are available to them in terms of the complaints process that if necessary to go through to the BBC Trust.
Presumably you will separate out those that are coming, for example, from the press offices of the respective political parties, or those that are associated with the respective campaigns on the referendum, from those that are coming from people who don't have an obvious tie in either of those respects. Is that?
If a complaint comes from if you like, political offices, and it's a formal complaint, it gets absolutely treated in the same way. It gets treated with absolutely the care you would expect. And if it's an informal complaint, which sometimes happened, then usually a dialogue engages with the senior staff responsible for that editorial output. So the complaints can come in a variety of forms, but if they're a written complaint and it's a formal complaint, it has to go within our complaints process.
And just the last two brief points. Have you got any sense of campaigns where complaints appear to be orchestrated? I mean, we all are subjected to letter-writing campaigns and email campaigns where it's obvious that the wording that is used reflects a concerted campaign, which is entirely legitimate. Do you get sight of that? Is there a way of distinguishing between sort of campaigns, if you like, and a spontaneous outburst of anxiety about certain programming? And also, do you have a sense, even if you can't give us the numbers of complaints, about whether or not they fall equally on either side of the debate in relation to the referendum?
In terms of the complaints, whatever view we take of the genesis of a complaint, we make sure that we treat each and every one with equivalence and respond equally to whatever complaint, irrespective of whether it might be part of a campaign or not.
And in terms of whether they fall either side of the referendum debate?
It's immaterial to us, right? At the end of the day, if a member of the audience complains, we will deal appropriately with the complaint. I mean, look, it's fair to say, right?
I mean, this is more in the context of the evidence we had in the first panel from Professor Robertson, in a sense. It would lead you to believe that more likely you're going to get complaints from those on the yes side of the...
I don't necessarily... I don't necessarily support that particular point of view. It depends, over a period of time, depending on what happens in the campaign, you will get complaints from one side or the other. From our point of view, we don't distinguish between them in that we will deal with each and every individual complaint. What I can say, as I've said already, is that, yeah, there's been an increase in the number of complaints. I indicated the two areas that where those had come from, and to be honest, I'm anticipating over the next 6.5 months there's going to be an even bigger number of complaints. But part of it depends, at the end of the day, about the issue. Part of it, that's where it is.
I should have declared an interest as a family member who works for the BBC. Apologies.
Thank you. Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. I've got a quick supplementary on George Adams' line of questioning, first of all. I'm still a little bit confused, sorry. From the cost-cutting exercise last year, the efficiency savings, my understanding is that 35 journalism posts were cut. Is that correct?
In the 2-year period up until April 2013, the Department of News and Current Affairs and BBC Scotland lost up to 30 members of staff. Those staff were not all journalists. They came from a variety of different parts of the country. A couple of those staff, for example, were content assistant. 3 of those staff were content assistant, which is a grade below that of a researcher. 2 of those staff were resources staff, staff who are around cameras and editing, and most of them, to be fair, Ms Adamson, were journalistic staff. They were not all in Glasgow. They came from a variety of places around the country, and by far the vast majority of them were voluntary redundancies.
Thank you. Mr Boothman, you mentioned 2 high-profile women journalists, glad to say, that have been appointed. Out of those 50 staff in the referendum unit, can you tell us how many are in journalism posts?
John, most of them, I think.
You mean seconded from other places?
No, you said there were 50 staff members in the referendum unit.
Oh, you mean are they working as journalists?
Yes.
Yes. Well, you get 14 trainees, and then the others are all working as journalists. Yeah.
So they're all journalism.
There's a production manager and there's an assistant production manager, and there's one researcher.
Yeah, I don't want to. Would it be possible for you to provide the committee with the breakdown of the structure of that unit?
All directly related to output, if you like, in terms of getting programming and production on the air.
Okay, thank you. That would be very helpful if that could be provided. If I could now go on to my own question, Convener. I don't know if you were able to view the previous evidence session, but I did ask Professor quite specifically about the methodology that had been used in his research, and he assured us that it was a grounded theory that had been used in other academic studies. But I think in your opening statement, Mr Macquarie, you questioned that methodology. Is that correct? You have concerns about the methodology?
We had concerns over how stories were categorised, if you like, and these were essentially errors of fact, which is contained in the document that we produced. I'm not in terms of the key thing for us is to get the factual base correct. It's up to Professor Robertson to apply whatever methodology that he wishes, but if that methodology is not on a sound factual base, then it's incumbent on us to try and help Professor Robertson by pointing out where we believe there to be errors of fact.
I mean, one of the things that we found interesting about this exercise is, having listened at great length this morning to the report's author, I'm not really sure which report we're talking about. Are we talking about the original report that he published in January, which remains this morning on the University of Scotland website, or are we talking about the amended report that he submitted to the committee that we saw for the first time last week? Fundamentally, one of the issues that did concern us has already been touched on briefly by Mr Macquarie, which was the initial report said that it had examined weekday evenings on 2 channels for 4 programmes, an hour each. Now, it's no mean feat to watch, transcribe and code that much of television, and I'm sure the committee will be aware of that. But let me say that the amended report told us that he'd studied 640 hours of programme, which is 110 hours less than the initial estimate in January, but yet, for the first time, the report suggested that the report was not only looking at weekday evenings on 4 programmes and 2 channels, but was including all of the weekend bulletins. Now, the curiosity for us was that not a single figure in each of the 17 categories identified in the report had been changed. So a number of bulletins across 2 days for a whole year on, as I say, 4 programmes and 2 channels had been analysed, yet there was no difference in any of the numerical analysis that's in the report. Other things just... We've provided an analysis of the report, and to be fair, the Professor has corrected a number of incidences in it. For example, there were some quite glaring things. Ruth Davidson and Willie Rennie were confused. One of the examples has been changed, another one has not been changed. For each example in Reporting Scotland that the report identified, there were either factual errors about the date, people who were named as taking part in the reports didn't take part, the end summary, what we call the payoffs of the report, were not actually the payoffs that are identified in the report, were not the payoffs that actually were either said by the reporters or included in the reports. There are a number of factual errors in the report. The other difficulty, to be fair, that we had with the report, and again we sent all of these observations privately to the report's author in January, were the classifications in the report. I heard, for example, Mr MacArthur ask a question this morning in relation to 2 subjects. One, that a health story was mentioned in the report, which was under the current devolution settlement and nothing to do with referendum coverage. I don't know why that should be in the report if it's about referendum coverage. And in relation to a question you asked about the former Auditor General Robert Black, which was about the affordability of free care for the elderly and prescription charges under the current devolution settlement. Now, there may be a rational explanation for this, right? Fair enough. But to be fair, these were what we thought were not minor concerns in the report, but some fairly significant and major concerns. And we welcome any report convener of this kind of nature. It's important that we talk about these things, and we are happy to do so.
Thank you. Claire.
Just finally, Mr McCorry, in your opening statement in discussing the report, I think you said that you were concerned about the allegations in the report. Having read it myself, I'm not aware of any allegations. I'm only aware of observations in it. Could you clarify what you meant by that statement?
I think that in terms of the report, suggests, for example, that there is what you might call a lazy approach, to our journalism, and I think we refute that.
Thank you very much. Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. Can I first of all say it's a pleasure to interview the BBC? Can I first of all talk about... sorry, I've got so much written down here. Obviously, throughout Scotland just now, there's pro-independence, there's pro-Scotland remaining in the United Kingdom, and there's a huge amount of people who are still undecided. If the examples in Professor Robertson's research points out some of the risks and uncertainties, now Professor Robertson appears to see, by the fact that you're highlighting these risks and uncertainties, they seem to be taken as somehow a criticism of the Yes campaign. From where I'm coming from, you're actually reflecting reality, because people across Scotland do want to know what happens in the result of a yes vote. How did you feel about looking at the examples of risks and uncertainties being defined as a criticism? I mean, I would hope that that is part of the job that you will do for the next 6 months, is to highlight and debate these risks.
This important debate, our desire is to provide the most impartial coverage that we possibly can, and that ultimately is a matter of editorial judgment for our highly experienced journalists. And they do that on a daily basis, and that doesn't mean simply between one side or another, but trying to get the whole spectrum and the range of views that are alive within this debate. So our job is to report the news as it happens, to make judgments on that. Professor Robertson, deals with issues of which story comes first and which comes last, which is some currency within some academic theories, but it's not something that we recognise within as a measure of impartiality within our output. And our desire is quite simply every day to bring, first of all, the most comprehensive coverage to the audience in Scotland, to be absolutely impartial in bringing that coverage to air, and also to provide, in terms of the quality of journalism and broadcasting, to aspire to the highest standard possible. And every day we look at that, question ourselves on how well we did the previous day. On a monthly basis, I chair a formal group across the whole of the BBC, where on an issue like the referendum, we will discuss and debate all the stories, how we treated them. And we're absolutely conscious that there are times with the volume of journalism that we are doing, occasionally we may get it wrong, and it's important when we do so, we'll put our hands up and admit that to be the case, and on other occasions then the BBC Trust may take a view of what we broadcast. But that is deep in the DNA of every journalist in BBC Scotland, to absolutely bring the very best of our journalism to this story. That's our aspiration, and I believe that in some of the examples that we can give of the programming that we've done, that we can substantiate and answer the question that the convener posed to us in coming here today, which was to study the level of preparedness for two major events, the referendum and the Commonwealth Games. And I think properly, I think the committee deemed it important to spend time on Professor Robertson's report, but it was only last week that we knew that Professor Robertson was coming to the committee, and we had, but our main focus. Yeah.
It's very interesting, but given the time, could we keep the answers a little bit shorter, so a lot of members still want to come in? But
thank you, convener. But our main focus is in delivering the best on these two events and trying to answer and assure the committee of our level of preparedness for them.
Yes, thank you. I certainly would hope, because I think people are looking to you and other sources of media for answers on pensions, banks, currency in Europe. My second question is, you say that Professor Black singularly failed to define fairness. Now, you've helpfully given us the definition of fairness as defined by Ofcom. Could you just explain how Professor Robertson's definition of fairness, if you like, how does it differ from yours, or the one set out by Ofcom?
Well, I think we were simply trying to understand from Professor Robertson how he defined fairness, if you like, in that regard, and we wanted to engage in a dialogue with Professor Robertson, on that, but he, in terms of the data, or how he defined it, he was unwilling to do so in that regard.
Okay, my final question, convener. As the deputy convener of the audit committee, I did find the comments about the Auditor General. Every report is critical in some way because it has to be critical. They're looking at public sector spending and value for money. I would hope...
Just for accuracy, and this is the point I was trying to raise earlier, I'm sorry I have to interrupt here, but my understanding is that he was not the Auditor General at the time. He was commenting as an individual. He was the former Auditor General, so to try and suggest it was a report by Auditor General is inaccurate, Mary.
well, he was 13 years a highly respected Auditor General in this Parliament, and I would certainly hope that that office doesn't come under criticism. Can I just finally say, given that we've already had an SNP minister writing to an academic institution to complain about a researcher there, Chris Watley, how can we move forward with a fair, highly informed, just and reasonable debate, given, what is at stake here in the next 6 months? And can I also put on record that I'm aware that some of your complaints have come from some Tory members who think that you're too biased in favour of independence. So whatever complaints you have, they're not all coming from one side.
Well, looking forward, we will be publishing our referendum guidelines, which are awaiting final approval by the BBC Trust. They've been for consultation, and it will be absolutely clear in terms of these guidelines. But to say that, I think this is a debate where impartiality is much more than a simple balance of appearances by members of one or other campaign. The objective is to achieve what the draft guidelines will call a broad balance between the arguments in this debate. And that will include, a range of voices. Our editorial guidelines are very clear that we must ensure that news judgments continue to drive editorial decision-making in news-based programmes. And in other words, we will cover what's happening whilst making sure that the bar for impartiality is high.
To inform and to be part of that debate.
Lots of members who want to come in this morning, so I really want to try and get through them. Joan McAlpine.
Thank you very much, Convener. If I could go back to Professor Robertson's results, notwithstanding the issues that you've raised about the types of programme covered, because you're in dispute about the hours and so on, I'll just stick to his figures on Reporting Scotland for the interest of clarity. Now, in terms of overall statements of a pro-independence nature and an anti-independence nature, he found that there were 171 statements of a pro-independence nature recorded and 262 of an anti-independence nature. Now, if you watched his evidence this morning, he said he wasn't too concerned about it because he felt it could be explained in the fact that you have to interview the three better together parties, and so therefore that is going to introduce an imbalance. And I know that that imbalance has been addressed in your referendum debate coverage, but is there a difficulty in addressing that imbalance when you're reporting news?
Yeah, I think we've moving into a new phase of the campaign. Certainly through the designated period, we would always have a broad balance of views between the arguments, the yes and the no. But we've really been operating that really for a long time now, certainly since last September, I would say. So in any one issue, whenever there's a debate, there should be a broad balance of arguments between yes and no, and that's the approach we'll take. In terms of a news story, particularly say something coming out of the Parliament, for example, would you find a conflict in terms of balancing between the different parties and balancing between yes and no? There's not so much of a conflict when it's Holyrood. I can see that there is a conflict when it's Westminster, and particularly we had Ian Lang's debate in the House of Lords, and obviously it's hard to find SNP peers to appear in a programme like that. So what we did was we had an SNP spokesperson on the next day, or a Scottish Government spokesperson on the next day, I can't quite remember, and that was a way of balancing up the argument in that.
Could you see, what I'm driving at is that you've got a commitment to impartiality. Could you see a conflict between the commitment to impartiality between 50-50 yes, no, and between a balance of three better together parties? And
I think there is a conflict there, but the way we're resolving the conflict is always to go for the balance.
Right. So will your referendum guidelines that you say you're about to publish, will they address that specifically? Right, okay, thanks very much. Yeah.
Can I give you an interesting example, right, which is really to say that you know, a simple mathematical formula and a stopwatch doesn't always address this, right? In the last month, when the Chancellor of Exchequer made an intervention in relation to the currency, Henry McLeish, who is a no supporter, made an argument which said it could be argued was supported the views of the other side of the debate. If you were looking at that in a purely 50-50 way, right, rather than just introducing a range of views to the debate, where would you put him in terms of a categorisation like the professors? The same might apply on the other side of the debate with, let's say, the monarchy. If you were to go and interview Dennis Canavan or the Greens, who take a different view from the SNP, for example, where would you categorise them? This is a complex issue. Right. At the end of the day, though, what the BBC attempts to do is to reflect a range of views across the debate, and that's the way we'll inform our audiences.
What I picked up from what you said a few minutes ago is that going forward, your referendum guidelines would be much more focused on the 50-50 between yes and no, notwithstanding there's a range of opinions within that.
I think at the end of the day that as the referendum gets closer, of course we will pay much more attention to that. There's different periods in the year in different circumstances where almost different broad balance would apply. For example, during the year of the professor study, there was a by-election in Aberdeen Donside. If we were reporting a referendum issue during that by-election, then we would have to report what all of the parties said, and that might include the Greens, it might include other parties as well as the four main parties who were standing. Once we get closer to the referendum, though, these things will be focused. That is not to say that we face particular challenges, for example, during the forthcoming European elections.
Moving on to another aspect of Professor Robertson's findings, he looked at the personalisation of independence as Alex Salmond's idea. And in reporting Scotland, he found 28 examples of that, compared to no examples of personalisation of ideas as from better together individuals. Now, notwithstanding what you've said about, you know, figures, and you have some issues with Professor Robertson's figures, that would seem to me to have no margin of error in it at all. You've got, you know, 28 versus 0, and I wondered if that was something that gave you cause for concern.
Tell you what I did, right, because I had a pet theory of my own about this. I looked at the period that, the weekend that Professor Robertson had studied between September the 17th, he says, 2012 and September the 18th, 2013. And I looked at Thursdays, because on Thursdays, the fulcrum of democratic debate in this institution is, of course, First Minister's questions, which by and large in both BBC and STV are reported fairly frequently. And it's very, very, very difficult not to report verbatim what party leaders say in First Minister's questions. That would be partially my simple explanation for what Professor Robertson refers to as the personalisation and possibly the demonisation. I think there might be a much simpler reason.
One day a week you're looking at one specific day, whereas he was very clear that he didn't take samples. He looked at every single programme in that period.
Well, I asked this morning, funnily enough, of my colleagues in our office in the Parliament. I think they told me that there are 37 First Minister's questions a year, or 36, and the number referred to by Professor Robertson is kind of about that, but he did examine two programmes that are Scottish-based in Scotland, and we don't cover First Minister's questions and Reporting Scotland every week. But look, I'm not saying that that is the complete answer, Ms McAlpine, but I think it's a reasonable theory to suggest.
What about the complete lack of personalisation of pro-UK ideas to any personality in the unionist side?
Well, I'm not necessarily sure that I accept the analysis, to be honest, but what I can do is explain, as I have, right, what I think has happened in terms of the reporting of this particular part of the campaign. I mean, we report First Minister's questions, we report what the First Minister might say, what other party leaders might say, and that would explain why there was a big number of instances where those individuals were being directly referred to in programmes.
To you, in terms of the media landscape around the referendum out with the BBC, there are a number of newspapers that, have nailed their colours very firmly to the mast and are very virulently, say, anti-independence. Say, for example, a paper like the Daily Mail, they would regularly use independence as the personal views of Mr Salmond on their front page, as indeed do some other newspapers. Do you think that perhaps your BBC journalists are influenced by that media landscape more generally?
Not particularly, no. I don't really know where to take that question, to be honest.
Obviously, these newspapers don't have any obligation to impartiality, whereas the BBC does.
Of course, but we've talked about 28 instances that you've cited and 36 FMQs. Doesn't take too much to work out that 28 is fewer than 36, so it seems to me to be quite a reasonable...
I'll interrupt again, but I'm pretty sure that Joan McAlpine did not say that she was citing 20 instances out of 36 FMQs.
No, I didn't.
No, we cited the 36 FMQs.
But you don't cover every FMQs as
no, but 28 is less than 36, so
yeah,
we can regard that it's a fair proportion.
Yeah, but there are absolutely no examples of the personalisation of ideas to better together individuals, and he's actually broadened that out to other individuals as opposed to one individual.
I think just to come to your question, Mr McAlpine, are our journalists influenced by other media who take a particular line in the debate? My view and strong belief is that because of the level of training, the integrity, the probity and the professionalism of our journalists, that is absolutely not the case.
Just one final question.
Well, I'm going to have to move on. We've got a number of people, but I just want to myself ask a couple of quick questions following on from that. Excluding FMQs, are you suggesting that it's only FMQs where the personalisation takes place?
No, I'm saying that part of the explanation, as I said earlier, perhaps could be, right, when programmes focus on what the leaders say in the chamber, right, would be the fact that, the fulcrum of democratic debate in the Scottish Parliament on a weekly basis is First Minister's questions. And having looked, as I said, right, at Thursdays in Reporting Scotland in particular over the last year, I found a number of reports, right? I think 14 of them in Reporting Scotland alone, and that obviously doesn't include what would have been on STV, where the First Minister featured heavily, not necessarily, as the lead person in a report or whatever, but, at the end of the day, it provided for me some explanation, right, of what the professor had an alternative theory for.
Having looked at it, it doesn't seem to me that explains it at all. It's the personalisation of ideas as Alex Salmond's or as better together individuals. It's not about, the First Minister at FMQs today said this and the leader of the Labour Party said that, or the leader of the Conservatives said something else. That isn't what this is about. This is about, for example, on any other subjects, for example, the currency union idea, that's Alex Salmond's idea as opposed to the view of Yes Scotland, or vice versa, the views of Better Together being expressed as the views of Better Together rather than the views of Alistair Darling.
Many of the exchanges in the First Minister's questions over the period that are referred to in the report were about the referendum, to be honest. I have not been subject party to the data set that the Professor used in his analysis, and that's something that when we originally corresponded with him, we were looking for.
I meant to mention this earlier. I find that very interesting. It is your output. You have the original data.
Which is why I had to look at it.
So you just said you don't have access to it.
I don't have access to what the Professor has or has not included in his report, is what I'm saying. I mean, I've already pointed out, for example, in terms of his categories and his classifications, I don't understand at all why, for example, health stories may be included in it. I don't understand, as I've said, for example, why the report that we've been talking about by the former Auditor General would be included in it. At the end of the day, until we have some opportunity to take a look at what was included in the report and what was not included, what I'm saying to you, right, is that in terms of First Minister's questions and in terms of the suggestion, the theory, the hypothesis that the Professor has, partly explaining what he regards as the personalisation and demonisation of the First Minister can be explained simply by the number of reports at First Minister's questions that dealt with issues around the referendum debate. That's my reading of it, given the simple level of knowledge that I had of what he studied.
I don't think it says demonisation, I think it says personalisation, which is
I think you will find that the report refers to demonisation.
In terms of the categories, Mr Boothman, in terms of the category is the personalisation of ideas as one or the other.
Well, as I say, he refers to demonisation in the body of the report and talks about Michael Foot and Neil Kinnock, and the same thing happening to the First Minister has happened to them.
Okay, let's look at the very briefly. And I mentioned this, I asked Professor Robertson the same question. Across all of the categories in his research, where there's a direct comparison between the two sides, like the one we've just been discussing, in all cases, there's a huge majority on one side against the other. For example, the ones that Joan McAlpine mentioned earlier, pro-independence 211, that's across Reporting Scotland and BBC, anti-independence 317. Finishing with pro-evidence unchallenged 10, finishing with anti-evidence unchallenged 40. Abuse of pro-independence figures 19, abuse of anti-independence figures 3, plus all the other ones that are listed in the report and Joan McAlpine mentioned earlier. Is it possible that over a 12-month period, an organisation that states that its primary purpose is to provide balance in this debate could end up with a set of figures that look like that?
I think in terms of the Professor places a lot of weight on the order, what you call unchallenged, if you like. If you end with one side or the other, he places a lot. We don't recognise that as being important. We recognise the narrative of the story, the clarity of the narrative, and the impartiality within a report as the clear issue. The Professor believes academically that order is important. It doesn't form part of the criteria to which we subscribe. In terms of the question, until we have access to the raw data in the way that the Professor is codifying and categorising, it's difficult to respond to that question, Mr Convener, which is why we've politely asked the Professor to make available the raw data.
But it's almost impossible to believe that, given the randomness of ordering, if you don't take any particular view or stance on the ordering of the stories, that it would be impossible for it to come out in the way that it has in terms of the research.
I disagree with that, because that depends on how the stories are categorised and how they're codified. And without the evidence of that raw data as to how these numbers are made up and examining them, we've found, on the examples given, we've found a number of errors. We've listed these errors before in our paper to Professor Robertson.
List an error, a typographical error, as a substantial error in the report.
Sorry, what's the typographical error?
The misnaming of the person who said it as Joanne Lamont versus
sorry,
Davidson.
Sorry, Convener. I don't. Well, this happened twice in the original report. That Willie Rennie was confused in the space of 3 lines with Ruth Davidson. And in the draft second report,
that change what was said?
If you'd forgive me, in the draft second report, one of those errors has been corrected and one of them hasn't, despite the fact that we pointed this out to the author in January.
Error, is it?
Well, I would have thought most people would know the difference
error
between Ruth Davidson and Willie Rennie, to be honest, right? But if we've pointed it out, and it's very, very easy simply to go and check, there also was
in what way, Mr Boothman, does that affect the figures?
Well, if as I've said, each and every example reported from Reporting Scotland has an error of fact, an error of inclusion, an error of omission, or an error in terms of how the author describes who was in it, or an error in the payoff to the report, and that's in each and every example, it makes it difficult and is of some concern to us that the numbers that might be in the report can be entirely correct. It's also fair to say, if the Professor says, as he said this morning, that he didn't just do samples of programmes, he surveyed the whole domain, yet, but in the space of a month, that domain changes from 2 hours every night to 2 hours every night plus a load of bulletins in 4 programmes and 2 channels over the weekend, that the number of hours he surveyed strangely seems to have dropped as a result of that and not gone up. It makes it quite difficult and quite concerning for us when we're looking at it.
Is there anything at all that you accept from Professor Robertson's report?
As I said to you, it's a remarkable feat that a report could be watched, transcribed and coded for an entire year for this amount of work. There is nothing else the BBC can do in relation to this but to respond appropriately to it, and that's what we feel we did. Right? At the end of the day, it would be remiss of us when reports like this come out not to respond to them in order that, well, our audiences, for a start, might have some perspective on it. There's no malice in that. There is no attack on the author in that. That's not something we would do. Despite what may have been said, at the end of the day, we wanted to deal substantially with the issues in the report, and I think we've done that in as fair and as reasonable and as prompt way as possible.
Mr. Robertson doesn't feel that. Sorry, Professor Robertson doesn't feel that at all. He feels he's been under personal attack from members of the BBC staff. He feels that he's being abused by the BBC. I think it was quite clear in his view of that this morning. You yourself have said that there has been no other instance that you're aware of that you've ever analysed and written to a person's employer about their work. It does seem, on the face of it, slightly odd.
We haven't written to the employer. What we've done is copied the principal on a report that was on the University of the West of Scotland, which I'm sure he would be absolutely aware of. So we're not providing the principal with any new news, as far as that's concerned. And it's with some puzzlement that we hear Professor Robertson's feelings in regard to the way that he was treated, because I've examined the language of the emails, I've examined the emails, and there is nothing other than a polite and normal request for the data.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to ask you about, you mentioned in your evidence a lot about the debates that the BBC are holding. We had some concerns recently about the adversarial nature of the last STV debate and the format of that. Have you received any positive, negative feedback about the style of the BBC debates, and do you have any plans to alter the format of the BBC debates?
So, just briefly before I pass to my colleague, Mr Mullen, one of the things in a campaign that's this long, from the BBC's point of view, in terms of engaging our audience, is to try as much as possible to use different formats. So that we can keep the audience engaged, we can keep up interest in the story, we can pick up new people who are coming along, we can target different segments of the electorate who are going to be voting in this referendum, and that's been one of our objectives from the very beginning. We've had audiences, for example, of people from different ethnic minority backgrounds in Scotland. We've had audiences of women. We are going to various parts of the country. We've had audiences of of 16 and 17-year-olds. We are trying some new and interesting formats. Many of you may have seen, for example, a couple of debates that we've ran with 3 journalists questioning 2 politicians, which has been interesting for us because it changes the dynamic of the politicians' responses. It actually, I think, gives a politician a better opportunity to explain where they are, but Mr Mullen might be able to enlighten you further about some of the other things that we are planning and doing.
Completely stolen my thunder there, John. Thank you very much. Okay, so we started our series of 9 debates. You'll have seen that we were in Greenock, first of all, and in Kelso last month. The aim really is, one of the crucial things I feel is to get out of the Central Belt. So Kelso last month, there will be Kirkcaldy next week, and then we're off to your backyard, Mr MacArthur, and Kirkwall. We will vary these debates. They've been produced by Mentor and the Indy outfit who make question time, but we will change these as we go along. We haven't finalised our approach to all of these, nor the venues, but we want to bring a bit of spontaneity to those as we go along. We're also having an online debate next week with the Generation 2014 group that's been brought together with my colleague David Stenhouse. They're the 50, 16 and 17-year-olds from all over Scotland who will be brought together in Pacific Quay next week for that. And they're a resource that right across BBC Network many programmes are making use of. We've got Brian Taylor's big debate continues its way around the country every Friday in Radio Scotland, and we'll also be initiating a series of specific local debates, radio debates, presented by our own correspondents, David Gray in Orkney, Cameron Buttle down in Borders, etc. And each month we earmark one day for a special edition of Newsnight, which have allowed for the Taylor debates that John's already mentioned. This programming and the debates will also be mirrored on BBC Alba and on Radio Nan Gale. You might be interested in the BBC Scotland's Knowledge and Learning Department is also planning a range of these operations. So, debate and getting people talking and coming up with new ideas for programmes, very much part and parcel of what we want to do over the next 6 months. We want to get out from the Central Belt. We want to get around the country. We want to give viewers and listeners a chance to put the questions that they think are important, both nationally and locally, to the politicians, the campaigners, and the key personalities in the campaign. And, it's a very ambitious programme. I don't think any other broadcaster is doing it, but we look forward to generating more light onto the debate than heat over the next few months.
Thanks for that. We've obviously talked a lot this morning about balance in news coverage. I wanted to ask you about balance in debates. And after the last STV debate, I was struck by a commentator who said it was his perception that if the debate was a football match, that one of the speakers had 60% possession to 40%. Where there's 2 speakers and 2 on either side of the debate in these television debates, what do you do to ensure that you monitor that there's equal say of people when there's 2 candidates on these TV debates? Is that something you monitor? Is that something you look at?
It's good chairing, and we've got a good chair. James Cook, our Scotland correspondent, is proven exceptional at that. We've gone back and looked at the programmes afterwards, and we feel there was absolutely a broad balance in both programmes between the yes and the no arguments. And that's exactly what we will do for every debate that we have, a broad balance between the yes and the no arguments.
Okay, Liam MacArthur.
Very much. Could I maybe just take you back to the issue of the personalisation? And obviously, Professor Robertson's report has provided statistics about which there can be no ambiguity in terms of the personalisation of better together individuals at 0. Over the course of the year of watching Reporting Scotland on a Thursday evening, did you establish how many references there were to either David Cameron or George Osborne or Nick Clegg bearing in mind that the attack, if you like, of the Yes campaign has not been largely about Alistair Darling, but about portraying it as something to do with Eton-educated Tories in the south of England. Would you be able to reflect on whether this came across in the period from 2012?
To be honest, it wasn't something, Mr MacArthur, that I looked at. I mean, there was a specific point made in relation to the report in the body of the report directly about the personalisation round about the First Minister, and that was the thing I was looking for, to be honest.
Right, but would it surprise you if there were zero references to either the Prime Minister or the Chancellor over the period from September 2012 to 2013?
I don't really know the answer to that question.
Interesting. Colin Beattie.
Reference was made before about funding of £5 million, and I assume that is 100% dedicated to the referendum. Have you got a published plan as to how that money is going to be spent?
We have an internal plan as to how that money is spent, which will be subject to both our internal audit and post a review of how we're spending the money, and each month we review our spend across the various criteria and targets that we have for delivering the referendum programming. We don't publish individual programme budgets because we've at previous sessions, when we've been asked to do so here, whether on Good Morning Scotland or the Today programme, we have consistently refused to go into individual programme budgets. But yes, we do. To answer your question, Mr Beattie, which I think is at the thrust of your question, do we monitor and do we have a system of a rigorous scrutiny of how that money is spent? Absolutely.
So can I say something, Mr Beattie, in that one of the things that we've had to do to this point is spend an awful long time, and actually, to be fair, this has been a much bigger job for my colleague, Mr Malcolm, in terms of the Commonwealth Games, is capacity building for this. That is to say, programme planning, identifying which programmes we're going to do, working out how many staff we'll need for them, what are the technical resources that we need in order to make that happen, and we've done a lot of that. It may be of interest to the committee to note that one of the big things that we've spent a very long time doing in the past couple of months is preparing for what, given this is the biggest political story that's never ever happened in the country, is preparing for the results service and the results programming around this. We are going to be in up to 40 live locations round about Scotland. We will take reaction from other parts of the UK and reaction from all around the globe, and this is going to be the biggest news and current affairs set up that we've ever had on a single day in the country, and I can tell you that that does take a lot of planning, so we've been spending a lot of time doing that. It would also be remiss of me to mention, because part of it's happening now, is that in the past few months we've been involved in quite a lot of liaison, not just with our network colleagues, but with our colleagues, for example, in the World Service. Right at this very moment, the John Beattie programme is broadcasting to Scotland and to the rest of the world in English in the BBC World Service, and that's the first of many programmes. There's a television programme being recorded for the World Service round about that. This afternoon, the World Service Arabic Service is making a live radio programme for radio and television, so that the debate about Scotland's future is going to be broadcast around the whole of the Middle East. That programme, the producers tell me, has got a particular focus on how in Scotland this debate is being carried out in the civilised manner that it is.
£5 million doesn't seem a lot for all to achieve all that.
In Scotland, to be fair, there have been additional resources made available to our colleagues in London, and aside from that, you have to remember that we have lots of capacity in the BBC in Scotland in using current affairs already, and a considerable amount of our existing programming will be turned over to the coverage not just of the Commonwealth Games but of the referendum.
So are there specific budgets allocated outside Scotland? Do we know how much they are?
Not from the £5 million.
Not referring to 5 million. Are there separate budgets outside Scotland?
In general terms, that departments across the BBC, for example, BBC News, have budgets for major events, major broadcasts, and to some extent have made provision, well, to a large extent, have made provision for the coverage of the referendum within their plan and within their budget. And that is also true in terms of television, where there are various supportive documentaries being made, for the network. And I think one of the questions that the committee wished to ask us, was not only our level of preparedness for the events of the referendum and the Commonwealth Games, but our ability to maintain, if you like, business as usual while these two events were going on. And I can report to the committee that we have had a hugely successful year, and I'm absolutely proud of the achievements, particularly the achievements of all our staff in delivering the quality of programming that they've done so in this year. And it's just worth noting, just to put in the record, that we have 7 BAFTA Scotland Awards and a particular recognition for our investigations team, who got a Scottish BAFTA and twice the Royal Television Society Award for investigative journalism, which is very rare to get it 2 years in a row. All of that was taking place while at the same time planning and putting in place the capacity for the Commonwealth Games and the referendum. And I'm intensely proud of the achievements of our staff in doing that, and intensely proud of our journalism and the quality of journalism that we brought, for example, to the tragedy of the Clutha Vaults, where the journalists responded tremendously, but not only on radio and television, but on online, where we saw record figures, over the past year in terms of the use of our online services. And I think it's important to put that on the record. Whatever the disagreements that we would sit down within an internal meeting of how I've implemented the DQF savings, as they're known, between myself and the NUJ, it's important to put in the record my regard and pride in the quality of the journalism that we brought not only to Scotland, but to the world.
Within the budget of the budget of 5 million, you've obviously said that you've already recruited 50 staff. Now, am I right in saying that 14 of these staff are trainees?
That's correct, yes.
Now, these trainees, are they all working full-time on the referendum?
Yes.
They are. Now, my understanding was that some of the referendum trainees were actually diverted to doing research on the report we've been talking about by Professor Robertson. Would that be correct? I heard there was 5 of them were working on that.
I think that is correct. I think the five were used to investigate some of the examples that Professor Robertson had looked at.
So they are being used for other things as well?
Well, you could argue that's referendum-related coverage, couldn't you, since it seems to be about referendum coverage that Professor Robertson's relating his report. But they are working in the referendum. They've, as I say, an intensive training period of 3 months, and then they're working on other programmes and other output across the...
When does the 3 months training finish?
Well, the 3 months is ongoing over the first 3 or 4 months they're there, so they've still got a week or so to go.
Sorry, Mr. Beattie, if I can explain this, right, what happened was we created these positions, right, for a year, which were 14 trainees positions in BBC Scotland. We spoke to the College of Journalism, which part of the BBC Training Academy, and what they've done is they have organised for us a gold standard training scheme across all our platforms. So almost as part of a kind of block release programme at the same time as the trainees are working on referendum programming, they've undergone periods of training. For example, they finished a week-long period of television training, I think the week before last. And before that, in November, they had online training, and before that they had radio training. So we reckon that they are in a place now where, in terms of any of the output across the whole of the department, that they can be deployed round about, whether that be in terms of our online coverage, in terms of any radio programmes we've got in the forthcoming months, for example, and I've not had a chance to mention these new radio formats coming up. Scotland 2014, I've mentioned there is a rich variety of work on online that I'm sure John could tell us more about. All of these trainees, as far as I'm concerned, are now in a pretty good place in relation to being able to carry out the tasks across the department that we would require them to do over the referendum. It's worth, and sorry, I didn't have an opportunity of saying this earlier, one of the interesting things about the length of this campaign and when the referendum actually is that for the first time over the summer period, BBC Scotland will be keeping on all of our political output. Now, part of that is a response to the fact that the Parliament itself has changed its timetable. But you'll be aware, in terms of political programming, what usually happens is when the Parliament goes into the long summer recess, all of the political programmes go off and don't come back to the beginning of the party conference season in late September. We won't be doing this year. So as well as all of the additional output that we've spoken about, we are going to keep going with all our political programmes. That's why the points I was making earlier on in terms of engagement with our audience are so important in terms of us having the opportunity to do new things, new formats, to surprise people, frankly. And that's one of the things that's our objectives in terms of our coverage, because at the end of the day, if we use the same old formats and the same old programmes, we hope we won't turn off audiences.
We're also investing in a number of craft apprentices, Mr. Beattie, who will obviously be hugely necessary in delivering the output, in addition for apprentices with the Commonwealth Games, which with the other event that you asked us to give assurance on and our level of preparedness, which we have Bruce Malcolm, our head of the Commonwealth Games, here, should you wish to, any questions on that regard.
So I've got one final question, actually, which is, I suppose, relates to what, there's been criticism of what you have reported by some people, and there's also been criticism of what you don't report. Which is always a difficult editorial decision, which, of course, I'm sure we all accept. The BBC Scotland gave extensive coverage to the question around Scotland's status in terms of its credit rating and the accusation that it would not get a AAA credit rating. There was a number of comments at various times covering that particular story. However, recently, when Standard & Poor, a well-known credit rating agency, produced a report, which you did cover, and Douglas Fraser, I thought, did a good job in covering it. But in that report by Standard & Poor, they said, even excluding North Sea output and calculating per capita GDP only by looking at onshore income, Scotland would qualify for our highest economic assessment. That was probably, from my point of view certainly, one of the most interesting and important statements in that report. Why was that not covered by the BBC?
I don't have the detail in front of me with regard to that. But if you're asking in terms of Douglas Fraser, the report that you refer to, you say that he made an excellent report. In terms of the judgment that is made, as I said before, it's an ongoing news judgment that our staff are making each day. So across our outlets, I cannot confirm that we didn't cover it, whether that was online or whether it was in the broadcast that you heard. But I would need to go back and research that.
My recollection is that we did cover it, that it was on the same day as the Standard Life story, and that it didn't lead.
You covered the Standard & Poor report. I'm asking about the very specific point, and I think very important point about their economic assessment.
I can't answer that without going back and looking again.
Okay. Well, I couldn't find it, so I find it curious. Even if it is somewhere on the online, and I'm not saying it isn't, it seems odd that such a prominent organisation in terms of credit rating agencies would make such a statement, and that wouldn't get the coverage it deserved, given the previous coverage of the opposite view.
AAA status. We certainly did report the AAA status.
Well, I'll give you the quote of what was actually said about that, but I mean, we don't want to get into. I don't want to get into
my recollection is that we did. I mean, I'm very happy to go back and look again. And as I say, it was a big, busy news day, and my recollection is that broke quite late in the day. But I'm very happy to go back and look at it again.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can I thank, on behalf of the committee, all of you for coming along this morning and answering your questions. We're very grateful for your time, and I'm sure all of the committee is very grateful for the responses you've given. And can I suspend the meeting briefly? Our second item today is to discuss cyberbullying. This evidence session will consider how schools should respond to cyberbullying, and we have identified in advance with today's witnesses some of the specific areas we want to discuss. Can I welcome to the committee Laura Thompson from Zero Tolerance, Brian Donnelly from Respect Me, and Tony Rafferty from the National Parent Forum of Scotland. Unfortunately, Caroline Harris from Anti-Bullying East Lothian has been unable to attend this morning. Before I move to questions, can I first of all apologise for keeping you waiting? I know that you've been waiting patiently, so I apologise for the delay in getting to you. But I want to begin this morning's questioning by going to Neil Bibby.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, everybody. I think we've got obviously a good panel this morning, and hopefully we'll have different perspectives and come from this in different areas, because it's obviously a very complex issue. I just wanted to start with a kind of just a general question, which would be, how can children be kept safe and safe from cyberbullying in these days of increasing connectivity, increase of use of social media, increase of use of the internet?
Who wants to begin? Laura.
Shall I?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, coming from Zero Tolerance, our focus is gender-based bullying. So I think any answer I give in the session will be focused on that. We don't see cyberbullying as particularly different from any other kind of bullying. It does present some slightly different challenges, but I think there's a massive focus on this idea that children are less safe online than they are in other areas, and I'm a bit worried that that is about seeing this idea that technical problems are a challenge, but they're solvable. We can solve them by teaching children about how to use the internet safely. We can solve them by putting apps online to to help children do that, and avoiding tackling the bigger issues, which for young people at school is gender, it's sexism. That's the problem they face, and it's not just online. Online is one way that bullies can target them, but it's happening all the time in lots of different ways. And the evidence seems to suggest that young people are quite, they're tech savvy, they know how to block people on Facebook, they know how to stop people contacting them, but that doesn't mean they do it, because they face so much pressure not to. For example, girls getting harassed by boys for pictures of themselves in their bra might not delete those messages, they might not be able to stop those messages because their friends tell them it's cool, or because they say the boy must love you, so it's mean to delete them. This is the kind of culture that we have to tackle, and telling young people how to be safe online very specifically isn't going to handle that.
Yeah, I would agree. It's only part of what we can do to respond to behaviour is help equip parents in particular and our educators about how young people use online and get online the technology that you use, where they go online, and how to make that safer. But bullying is about relationships. Bullying is behaviour that's done by people to other people, and what underpins bullying that takes place online is the same as other forms of bullying behaviour. Effectively, this is how bullying looks in 2014. If you and I are friends, or we're friends at school, and we have a fallout and you ignore me one day at school, you might then go and post something on Facebook or Twitter about that, and that'll carry on perhaps the next day in school or on the bus. There's no very clear delineation between where it happens to people, and the impact on them. Effectively, their online life and their online profile are as much part of their social circle as other parts of their life, school and friends. So it's we've encouraged people for a number of years not to make the distinction, because if we focus on one type of bullying, we ignore other types of bullying, and the focus on what's happening online has led to a dilution and an ignoring of what is happening to children more regularly, which is impacts on stuff that happens face to face or behind their back as well.
I think from a parent's point of view, it's actually sad to say, but we've actually found some very recent evidence in where I live, and the parents are also doing the cyberbullying themselves, against the teachers. So, and as then it transpires that the children are actually copying what the parents are doing. So, although there's a lot of evidence that says that parents aren't really aware till it's too late about what's happening, but there's nowhere is it mentioned about what parts the parents might have actually played in these children actually doing it. So I think that as well as just looking at it for schools, we also have to look in at where parents are involved. So let's say you've got fresh evidence of that exact from two things I've been involved in, where I was asked to get involved in, and that was just to get people to take some horrific remarks about a head teacher off Facebook, because it was an open Facebook account, which means the children were able to go and look to see what the parents had been writing about the teachers. So if the parents are doing it, then how can you expect the children not to follow?
I think that's an interesting point about the parents. Can I just focus on schools at the moment and ask you what can schools actually do to help and support children whilst they're at school, because a lot of it does surround schools, pupils out with school and in school. Should there be some sort of national programme, or should it become incorporated into daily discussions about internet use? I mean, for example, I was at an event recently, and the advice given to children there was, if you've to tell somebody about it, to tell somebody you can trust about the cyberbullying abuse they were getting, in the similar way that you would be encouraged to do that if you were being bullied normally. What are the things you would like to see schools do to tackle this issue?
Fundamental policy in place whereby it was part and parcel of curriculum for excellence, so that you just looked at that as another subject almost, if you like, and make sure that you involve all the outside agencies and not just keep it within the school. Because I know up in Aberdeen, you know, where I live, we involve, you know, the outside agencies an awful lot. You know, coming into the schools and making and holding regular things, especially, you know, from P4, you know, to P7, and then also holding sessions which are really well attended, you know, for the parents as well. So to make sure that everybody is included, and if we're having an inclusive thing within the school, so the children and the parents can attend the same meetings at times, which is what we do sometimes. You know, we found them, you know, very, very, very rewarding and everybody getting an awful lot out of it.
I think what we've seen happen in many schools, and certainly seen understanding of this grow in recent years, is where schools see this very much, not, as I said before, not as a technology issue, but a behaviour issue. And the bullying that happens online needs to be treated like other types of behaviour. We do not see any need to have a separate policy around what happens online. Your anti-bullying policy should encapsulate all types of bullying, because there's different types of bullying that happen online as well. Gender-based stuff, racist, sectarian, there's a whole host. Homophobic bullying takes place online and offline as well. We need to be very careful not to carve that out. The evidence suggests that where schools approach anti-bullying in a broad sense, with an equalities focus and a children's rights focus, when you do that, you talk about relationships, and you talk about relationships that happen face-to-face, and you talk about relationships that play out online. Most children online connect with people that they know, that go to the same school or in the same area as them, by and large. And it's about role modelling appropriate relationships in relation to what parents do, but schools recognising that they can and do make an impact on how children relate to each other, and that promoting positive relationships, involving parents in that and involving young people in that, and discussing how should you conduct yourself online, what is the impact of commenting or passing on something online or hearing something in the corridor. Put it in the realm of respectful relationships, and that lets you talk about how they play out everywhere, because children and young people don't differentiate in the way adults do. They do know the difference between online and not offline, but they don't differentiate in the way of there's this phenomenon over here and that phenomenon over there. It's all about relationships and behaviour.
I would agree with that, and I would add that discussion about gender needs to be part of our SHPE. It needs to be fundamental to teaching that. It shouldn't be just about how to avoid getting pregnant. Young people really want to learn about healthy relationships. They need to talk about the issues that are surrounding them. So it's the sexualised images that they're seeing, perhaps the pornography that they're seeing. They're desperate to talk about those things and the way they might affect how they treat each other. So I think that needs to be part of, it's a whole school philosophy. It's about creating a culture in the school that respects other people. It's not that the technology stuff isn't useful, but it shouldn't be the main thing. It shouldn't be seen as the answer. If we can just control the technology somehow, then young people won't be bullied anymore. I suppose the only other thing to add to that is, I think legally there's a few sort of grey areas when it comes to online bullying and abuse, and that teachers maybe could have a bit clearer guidance on. So, for example, there's no specific law against sharing someone's intimate image without their knowledge, but there are laws that can apply to that, and it is a quite complicated area, and I think the law itself is only just catching up with the kind of guidance that's giving out on what things you can prosecute and what things you can't, and I think that would be a really useful tool for teachers to have, to know when has this crossed from bullying behaviour we can deal with in school into something that's actually against the law, it's abuse and it's harassment, and we need to take it a bit more seriously.
Can I ask for your views about internet access in schools? And you mentioned access to sexualised images earlier. Do we currently have the balance right between access to websites that will provide educational purpose and benefit in schools, and also, you know, prohibits access to sites that you know, children can be subjected to cyberbullying or harassment?
I think we're getting better, but we still, by and large, schools err on the side of caution. For example, YouTube, which is a fantastic resource for parents and children and young people, There's a lot of how to keep yourself safe and how to set up things that are really useful, good learning tools. There's lots of great videos made by young people all over the world, and YouTube is one of the hardest things to access in schools. There are versions of it that are safer, smaller sort of internet sites on YouTube, but we need to be a little bit bolder in terms of going on that journey with schools and families as a collective, and trying to get over what the fear is. I was contacted recently by a journalist because a school had blocked Snapchat on its Wi-Fi network, and the journalist wanted to know what the latest scandal was about Snapchat. Had a young person hurt themselves or something? And there was no scandal. It was just the school didn't want access to any social networking sites for fear it would distract children and young people. So we're still at the infancy with this, but we need to replicate the positive steps schools are taking more, and embracing and using access to the online world as a tool. Because if it's part of your everyday life and it's part of your use in school, then you can talk about how to use it respectfully. If you block it, ban it and demonise it, you're not necessarily in a position to then engage about how it's used.
Colin Beattie.
Thank you. I was looking at one particular statement in the National Approach to Anti-Bullying. It says, "We've aimed to avoid labelling children and young people as bullies or victims because these labels can constrain thinking of the problem as solely a characteristic of the individual rather than as a problem that emerges from complex social dynamics." Is that gobbledygook?
Absolutely not, no. And I'm not saying that because I wrote it. That is, labelling children is risky. Adolescence' character is not fully formed. No one is ever just one thing. Children can bully and be bullied. How shall we label them? And sorry, it's fundamental. This is not a way of this is not about finding a nice way to talk about a difficult issue. You don't change someone's behaviour by labelling them. You change someone's behaviour by telling them what they did was wrong, why it was unacceptable, and what you expect instead. That's a fundamental tenet of behaviour management. Labelling goes against that. Labelling causes stereotypes, and if your child is labelled in such a way and you don't see them fit in that stereotype, it's very hard to view sometimes their very damaging behaviour as bullying. That particular approach that we have in Scotland is something that has been commented on and has impacted on policy and practice around the world, and we're very much seen as at the forefront of an approach to bullying that seeks not to demonise and label but actually deal with behaviour. It's a solution-focused approach. So forgive my passionate defence of that, but it's fundamental to the success that we have had.
I noticed that one thing that surprised me was there's differing opinions on whether cyberbullying is more prevalent against girls or against boys, and I'm not sure the evidence here really points one way or the other, but I do look on page 2 of the document I have in front of me here, in Table 1, there does seem to be significant differences between primary and secondary, which presumably is part of the development of the child in terms of what they're interested in bullying people about, if for want of a better word.
I think it's really as you get older, your online profile matures, and once you get to primary 7 and get into sort of S1 and S2, it's all about socialising, it's all about connecting with people that you know and expanding your social networks, as opposed to using it more of a tool when you're younger. It's merely, I think it kind of represents how relationships develop and change as children get a little bit older and move into...
Evidence that children who have been bullies, for want of a better word, in primary continue to be in secondary?
It depends on how successful, if any, intervention has worked. I think children who were labelled in that way in primary may still be labelled that way in secondary, and it's part of the problem. But if you don't intervene and you don't address the behaviour and give people a way of repairing relationships and developing more respectful relationships with their peers, then that behaviour is likely to continue. If it's not been challenged appropriately, then it will continue. If it's been rewarded in terms of status then it will continue as well.
Do we have any evidence as to the success of intervention at primary school level in terms of reoffending in secondary?
There's not any sort of scientific evidence being gathered in Scotland in relation to that, but we do know through evaluations that we've done and work with other agencies that where the environment and the school ethos in primary school about repairing relationships and the approach that we take around not labelling, helping find solutions can make children more pro-social and less likely to. But it's sometimes they experience a dramatic change from primary school to secondary school in terms of school ethos and culture, which most of them cope with, but it can present challenges. And in actual, what we know about child development, particularly around boys and girls maturing at different ages, S1, S2 and S3 are significant years in terms of figuring out who you are and where you fit in and how you respond to the world around you. If that helps.
I think it's also when that age is when they come into contact with stereotypes about straight or gay, or what a boy should be like, what a girl should be like, and that's when sort of the adults around them will influence whether they latch onto those and use them to isolate other young people.
Thank you. Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. I was interested by Mr Donnelly's, I think all of you have actually said it about treating bullying as a whole and having strategies for dealing as a whole, and all of that makes a great deal of sense. But presumably with online, there is the capacity for this to expand beyond those that wouldn't have been involved in bullying were the online option not there. I mean, I think we're all aware of the perils of putting stuff online that you would never dream of doing face to face, and that must therefore see issues of bullying, whether directly or simply being kind of part of the mob that isolates, expanding ever wider. And how does that present particular challenges for tackling that in a school basis, and therefore how, without separating it out, how do you begin to kind of tackle that?
I would suggest, sorry, if I can, that it's because we're not talking about it enough as a relationship issue and how to conduct yourself online and see it as an extension of developing respectful relationships. When children, as we pointed out earlier, can be quite savvy and are aware of stranger danger, despite how some who may not ever feel they could be exploited are, but they feel they know what to do, they know how to block, and they know some of the practical elements of it. It's about engaging them about the impact of letting a comment slide on Twitter and not making any kind of input to say, I don't like that or I disagree with it, or if you like it and share it, you feed this, and what happens is comments that have always taken place. There's always been people gossiped about what people wear, what they said, what their mums like, who they fancy, and those comments tended to just circle around the people that made them. Whereas now they can make these comments online and they can be permanent and they can grow arms and legs very quickly. It's not about focusing on what the technology can do, it's focusing on helping young people understand how to conduct themselves in this social space. The internet's a place, not a thing.
Because in a sense, your comment online, whether it's you initiating it or you liking and sharing it, is that you don't then see the impact that has on the individual or individuals concerned, which actually must make the challenge of talking about relationships that bit more difficult.
It's acknowledging as adults first that this is a social space that children occupy. So that's what's new. And we need to integrate what we know about how we've always helped children manage and negotiate risks and relationships in this new place and what the impact of that is. People have always felt for a long time and talked about anonymity as the driving force behind that, when in actual fact the research, there's no research to support that. The research suggests that a belief that you won't get caught because it's so vast, and also a failure in a lot of children and young people to understand the permanence of comments that they make online are why some of this behaviour is continuing as well. So we know that, so we know to focus on educating about the permanence of it rather than how can we make technology make it less anonymous, where actually anonymity is not the massive issue online that some may have you believe.
I think certainly, online there is, added things that won't happen face to face. So for instance, if you've got to go and learn the new language that children, are actually using online. So if you get somebody who goes and posts a photograph of themselves online, and then all of a sudden, thousands of people can see this photo, and they all start putting whatever the little words and that they use now to tell people that they're ugly or whatever, and that can obviously have profound effects. So that was one place where it does get taken to a whole new level, but it's still, like Brian said, it's still part of the whole package. To get people to be aware of what they're doing, and it is all about the social aspect.
It's a massive children's rights issue as well, because we all have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and children have a right to privacy. It's enshrined within the UNCRC. But, and it is a big but, that doesn't apply to the World Wide Web. If you don't make something private, you can't have a reasonable expectation of privacy, because anyone can read it, anyone can copy it, anyone can screen grab it. And we need to focus on helping children understand what their rights are in relation to this, but also the risks that go with that. And if you want something to be private, there are, the default settings on anything we use online are not designed with your privacy in mind. But we need to help educate parents, teachers and young people about rights and expectations that they can have in relation to that.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. I've just got two short questions. You'll be pleased to know. We have a SPICE briefing here today, and I was really just looking for some sort of evidence base. If I can just say, your submission, Respect Me, found 16% of 8 to 19-year-olds had been cyberbullied. Livingston's research, 25,000 across Europe, was 6%. Ditch the Labels 2013 survey was 17%. And when my colleague Liz Smith wrote to all the councils in Scotland to ask the number of cyberbullying incidents in the last 4 years, she got, it ranged, well, 16 councils responded, 16 didn't. It ranged from 1 in Highland over 4 years to 95 in West Lothian. And so what I'm really asking, Convener, is there a... Of course, your research base is the most authoritative, but which one's accurate here? That's what I'm struggling for. I know it exists. I acknowledge the problem. I'm just trying to get the extent of it, or if it can be measured.
I think it's difficult because not all young people differentiate bullying that happens, because it will have both an online and an offline element to it. And when we did our research, 16% entirely mirrored research that had been done in Northern Ireland, Wales and England. There are some organisations who have a vested interest in getting money to develop resources, getting money for websites. We found 16% of children who'd been bullied, 25% were worried about it. There are other organisations that would have added those together and said this percentage is affected by cyberbullying, and it gets more traction in that sense. I think the number may have gone up, but it's because behaviour is migrated to where children spend time, and children spend more time online than ever. So I think that at the time, I think that 16 to 20% was reflected across the UK. I have to say.
And my second question is, I'm pleased to see that you work with SAMH. I've got huge respect for that organisation. But I note that the Scottish Government is doing a training day for teachers, and that's very, very welcome. But also, you've developed a 2.5-hour training session for parents that you're piloting in the Central Belt. And also, you're going to have... yes, well, that's probably it. So I just wondered if you can explain that to us, because I do think parents need some help here, and also what your plans are for rolling that out.
This was to address a specific need that came out of both the research that we did and the very extensive amount of training we've done on bullying and on online bullying. And we found that where parents were confident, where parents understood the notion that the internet was a place, not a thing, and that they had to learn how Twitter and Facebook actually work, we found that those parents were more confident to deal with problems when they arose. And there was a lot of work that you can do with schools, but we found that parents were sometimes being left to one side. there are some parents who are very engaged, but others who aren't engaged at all. So what we tried to figure out was a way of doing this on a local level, rather than you know, do this through strategic partnerships, or say we'll put on training in a particular place, but actually go to schools and organisations and say, could you get 15 or 20 parents to come along for 2.5 hours of an evening, and we'll provide a trainer that introduces them to why we talk about bullying the way that we do, what we've learned about the links between bullying and online safety. And then the second hour of that workshop is entirely hands-on, where parents can either bring their own devices or use computers that we'll have access to through schools and partners, where we'll actually walk them through a process of this is how to make a safe profile for a 14-year-old on Tumblr, on Instagram and on Facebook. Because there's something like 16 clicks that you need to go through if you're on Facebook and you're under 16 to make sure it's as safe as it can be. And a lot of people don't know how that's done. So we will give people practical time to engage with the technology and understand the places that their children are going, not to see it as a technology issue, but to understand if you've got children and you play a role in children's lives, you have to understand this world that they spend time in, just like adults have always done, where children go. The reason we're rolling it up in the Central Belt is purely value for money in terms of using our time, but we intend to, we've already engaged with Renfrew, East Renfrew, Glasgow, Edinburgh and North Lanarkshire, who have new kind of state-of-the-art classrooms or learning centres that have computers in them that will be perfect for training 20 to 30 parents in an evening, so that they can get core messages about respectful relationships and bullying. But, and we'll make recommendations at the end of that 6 or 7 month pilot as to how we can roll that out across the country, what the resource implications of that are, and what the partnerships that we'll need to make it succeed.
And certainly that is something that the National Parent Forum we would absolutely welcome, because at the moment most councils would just generally tend to do, you know, as my own does, you know, they hold an evening session, but it'll just be to do with internet safety, and that's where it stops, and that's why we need to, you know, open it out and make it, you know, the whole package.
Thank you. Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. I suppose the internet's 25 years old this month, and it's 25 years old, but certainly not 25 years mature. And I do think that over time, our attitudes to privacy will change, and also some of the services will have to adapt to the concerns worldwide about these issues. I'm glad we're discussing this today, and I'm aware that there have been some excellent cross-party contributions to a couple of debates recently in the Parliament. One in a members' debate on revenge porn, and another debate on a committee report, I can't remember which committee it was, but a committee report on child sexual exploitation, both of which touched on some of the safety issues, some of the dangers, and also some of the specific dangers to women in particular, although it's not gender specific, both genders can be affected by these kinds of issues. And I just wonder if we really are getting a proper message about the dangers out early enough to young people at the moment. And obviously these are the areas that are moving, you know, further in their sexual maturity and as they get older. But should we be getting a much stronger message about personal safety and personal privacy to younger people?
Yes, but I would be wary of focusing too much on what potential victims can do to protect themselves at the expense of focusing on what young people shouldn't be doing to other young people. That's the thing that really needs to change. There's only so much a young person can do to protect themselves. Young girls talk about being harassed by 50 texts a day from boys asking for images of them. It's not enough just to say, or just ignore it, or just block those boys when it's boy after boy after boy, and it's part of the culture. The culture is what needs to change, and I can't emphasise enough how schools really need to tackle that. They need to be brave enough to talk about those issues with young people. They need to be skilled up to talk about those issues. Parents need more resources to be skilled up to talk about those issues. And there's only so much telling girls and women how to, you know, carry your keys in your fist when you walk home you can do at the end of the day.
Thank you. I'm aware that we've focused quite a bit on what schools can do, and but a lot of this bullying will be unknown to the school because they're not using the school internet. For instance, young people are turning up to school with tablets and phones that are internet enabled now, and there's a lot of this happening outside of school. Are we engaging with the third sector organisations enough with young people, and actually going into the communities and into the sort of social side of where young people are to actually be getting these messages across as well?
We do some work with youth groups, training them in, not specifically again cyberbullying, but it's sort of to the general issues around relationship abuse. And the ones that we've spoken to have been absolutely fantastic. They seem much more ready for this than some schools are, because perhaps the young people feel more comfortable with them, they're more able to talk about those issues than they would perhaps with teachers. So the organisations we've had contact with are ripe for more support and more input on that. It's hard for me to say.
Yeah.
Sort of more generally.
We've done a considerable amount of work. Education certainly takes up the largest, that's the largest group of stakeholders we have. And it's underpinned by the message that it's not about where bullying happens, it's about what happens. Yeah. Because I've seen examples where people have told head teachers that they're scared because a threat was issued online, and the teacher said, well, that didn't happen here, so I can't do anything about it. And I've seen that comment be generally acknowledged by a room full of professionals. But essentially what's happened is a child has said, I'm scared and I'm worried, and they've invested in a teacher that they're fearful of something. It doesn't matter where it happened. You know, if a child wasn't being fed or clothed at home or was neglected, it's perfectly legitimate for them to raise that with the school and expect their duty of care to come into play. And we've seen fantastic. When we gave evidence at the summit in December, there were school children there who talked about the school being involved, and I wasn't surprised by that. By and large, practice is good. But we've also done this training with foster carers, social care staff, residential workers. We've done quite a lot around child protection and sport, done some work with coaches, and a fairly broad range of kind of third sector partners. Our training that we offer on this is free and available to everyone. It's patchy, there's no doubt about it, but we don't focus solely on what schools can do, although it does take up most of our time. We've got other examples where people have really embraced the message and they're well placed because they're in the community. And where the practice is at its best is where schools genuinely are community schools, where the doors just don't close when school finishes, but it's part of the community.
But I think teachers still have like Brian said, still have this duty of care to actually follow up on things, and when things are happening online, there's obviously still going to be a very good chance that those things will follow on into the classroom, so that those children, unfortunate children, will end up being bullied physically, you know, at school as well. So it just doesn't just stop there. And in a sort of perverse way, if you like, that's how, you know, the thing that happened up in Aberdeen with the Hamilton School, which is now being closed, and that started off on Facebook with parents, you know, slagging off a head teacher, and then somebody started putting in, you know, real comments about what was happening, and a friend, one of the parents was a policeman, and thought, I've got to take action on this. So he went and put a report in, and then from that, the Care Commission was in the next day. Then after that, HMI was in, and the school got closed. So it's just not. If only you could just box it all into one little bit, but it's just very, very difficult to do.
Just add to that as well. I think schools need to go further than, okay, we've had a report and now we will act on it. They need to be open to receiving that information, and that is about having that school culture, and it's about talking about these issues, because particularly when it comes to sexual bullying, when it comes to things like images being shared, it's incredibly difficult for a young person to share that. And I would suggest that some of these statistics don't really represent the true picture, because there are things that young people would never necessarily class as bullying, and they certainly wouldn't tell a parent that someone shared a picture of them having sex around the school. So unless that culture is created and teachers are saying, come and tell us if any of these things are happening to you, whether, you know, youth workers, social workers, all of those people need to show that they understand those issues, and that that young people can go and talk to them about it.
Jane Baxter.
Thanks, Convener. Following on from that, it actually leads into my question, because I wondered what the scope is to link this work into the GIRFIC agenda or the child protection work, because there must be times when people are put in a position where they do feel they need to feed it into the system. And I'm not sure how that works, or if it could work better, or what your views might be on that.
I think what we've seen is significantly increased consistency in terms of local authorities having a policy position about what they mean by bullying and the types of behaviours that they would expect to record and report. And where that, if you follow our approach and work in partnership with us, we will make sure that the policy that you have in the training is in step with health and wellbeing outcomes and curriculum for excellence, and also that your policy reflects the GIRFIC outcomes. We're going to work with colleagues to help guidance on named person around sharing welfare concerns, because I think bullying will probably be a daily concern in relation to welfare. So what we're trying to do is make sure that it's joined up at a policy level. Certainly, where we've been involved in a policy or training, it's in step with the curriculum for excellence and reflects the outcomes around getting it right for every child. But sometimes it's about helping schools or agencies understand what they have to do with this GIRFIC agenda, as they call it, where they're not sure. A good whole anti-bullying approach that recognises different types of bullying, children's rights and equalities will take them a considerable way down the road to being able to demonstrate and produce evidence that children's welfare is paramount, that they promote respectful relationships, that children are safe, healthy, etc., like that.
Just quickly, Convener, I'm wondering if any work's been done, or if there's any awareness of whether bullying, the broad picture of bullying, is a bigger issue for children with learning disabilities. Does any of the research or
Very much so. There was research done by Enable across the UK. The two groups that the research points well, everyone and anyone can be bullied for a variety of reasons, from hair colour to size, gender, ethnicity. If you're LGBT or T, or perceived to be LGBT or T, or disabled, it appears that you are likely to be bullied more frequently. Yeah, there's research to suggest that.
Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier on, Mr Donnelly, you were talking about the level of success that we have achieved so far. I think you said others around the world were looking at some of the work that was being done here. How do you define success?
We had a 27-month external evaluation of the service, and that is the longest evaluation I've ever been involved in anything. That evaluation looked at the impact that we had as a service on our stakeholders. Did we build capacity and confidence of stakeholders? And then the second part of that evaluation looked at what impact that had on children and young people. And did they see a difference? And did they feel more confident in themselves? And did they feel more confident in the adults around them? That if they had a problem with bullying, that people would know what to do. And over that 27-month period, the evaluation found that we did make a difference. That's where the name for the title of the report came from. And that Respect Me was a catalyst for change, that we contributed to schools and local authorities establishing ownership and confidence to recognise and respond to bullying more effectively. So we've taken that, the elements that it said contributed to success, to making a difference in children's lives, were a flexible approach to training, policy support that was also strategic policy influence around child protection, getting it right for every child and making that link up, working in partnership with local authorities, and having resources and campaigns that complemented all of that. These all combined to be the catalyst for change, rather than a campaign or training or resources or a government policy. It's the cohesiveness and the language that's consistent throughout all of that that's given a more consistent picture.
Given that big picture of what you've defined as success, is bullying going up or is it going down?
If you look at childline statistics, bullying is no longer the top reason that young people call childline. It's gone down in that sense, and ourselves in childline have commented, Childline were the first to comment, they feel that as a result of a clearer, cohesive policy picture in Scotland and the work that they do and the work that we do. I think awareness of bullying is increasing. I'm happy to say that I think reporting of bullying is increasing, but that does not necessarily mean that as a behaviour or as a phenomenon that we're seeing an epidemic or an increasing problem. I think behaviour that has always existed continues to exist. It's migrated to new social spaces. So from that point of view, I don't think we're seeing an increase in bullying, and there is stuff, particularly in Scotland, the Behaviour in Schools survey that would suggest it's not the gigantic problem that perhaps the Daily Mail would have people believe, which in no way takes away the real challenges of the impact that the behaviour has on people.
It's perhaps then it's the difference between the reality and the perception. I would suspect many people have a perception that bullying, at the very least, is not going down, or in fact may indeed be getting worse because of the cyber aspects of it. Now, I know that's, and I think we probably all agree, that's just it's one aspect of what is bullying. Bullying is bullying is bullying, whether it takes place in the playground or whether it takes place online. But has the massive expansion on the ability of young people to have internet-capable devices at all times and access to the internet, has that not led to an expansion in bullying? Because before it was constrained by the physical nature of you had to be effectively in contact with the person in order to bully them or be bullied in a sense. But because of online spaces, whatever particular social media that we're talking about, that means that effectively it's much easier to bully an individual. And has that not led to an expansion in bullying?
There's no evidence to support that. As simple as that, that having access to the internet, as I said earlier, it's about not thinking you'll get caught and not understanding the permanence of it has led to it. But I think what we've seen is the profile of this behaviour has increased, and the media interest in it, because of the media interest in what children and young people are doing and the dangers of social media, and a massive conflation between all online risks and how behaviour can very escalate to be abusive, predatory behaviour. That's not bullying, and there should be a distinction. But it does present new challenges. It presents us with a challenge for adults to learn about this new social space and how it works and how to promote positive relationships on it. But there's no evidence to suggest that simply having access to a laptop, a tablet or the online makes people more likely to bully than they would have done if they didn't have that.
I wasn't suggesting it makes an individual more likely to do it. I was suggesting that the ability to, their ability to do it is expanded.
Well, yeah, I suppose that, and that's in step with what I'm saying, is the people who would bully, whether the internet was 25 years old or not, are as likely to do it using whatever means they have at their disposal. I suppose what I was saying is that, well, if I was inclined to bully and I had access to the internet, I'm likely to use it to bully. If I'm not inclined to bully, having access to it won't necessarily mean, you know, so that expansion might mean that behaviour from some people has become more prolific, but it doesn't mean there's a whole new group of people. There is a small group, but not a whole new group of people that are.
That's exactly. I mean, I wasn't suggesting there was extra people. I was suggesting there was extra incidents, because individuals who wish to bully others now have the ability to do it 24/7.
But again, it's maybe, you know, what you would class as being incidents, because maybe some of the children don't realise, you know, what exactly what an incident is. So, you know, so it's a lot different from, you know, being in the school playground, you know, and going and hitting somebody, to actually just going online and thinking that it's okay and it's fun, just when somebody said something horrible about somebody, just to go like, you know. So maybe there might be an increase in that, but that doesn't mean to say that all those people are going to be bullies themselves. But because of the way that the children themselves contribute to what's on Facebook and Instagram and everything else, you know, that can quite easily make it look as if it's been going up to the sky. But I haven't seen personally any rockets in schools, and no, there's not any great evidence that there's suddenly more expulsions from school or suspensions or anything. So you would expect it, if it was going to be a lot more in line, you would expect to see it being mirrored in the school as well.
Thank you. Just a final question from Joan McAlpine.
Thank you very much, Convener. You'll be aware that the Children and Young People's Bill, which was recently passed by the Parliament, incorporated GIRFEC into legislation, and as part of that created a named person. Do you think the support of a named person for young people and their families will help tackle the problems that you've described today?
Early days to fully comment on that, because until it's embedded and it's actually working,
I would imagine it's not going to get to the named person until a young person is being quite extremely bullied. I think it might help with that, but it's not going to help with the day-to-day. And again, obviously, I'm going to go back to gender, but it's not going to help with the day-to-day kind of sexism and harassment that girls face that they might not even talk about.
We do have an opportunity, though, to provide good, robust guidance to go alongside that element of the Children and Young People's Bill around sharing information based on concerns about welfare, because obviously that changes from sharing consideration or concerns around safety and harm, that obviously bullying online or offline is going to have an impact on welfare. So we want to be able to use illustrative examples where the challenges that might face. If I don't want a named person to perhaps know about the bullying that I'm getting, because it could out me in a way that I don't want to if I'm emerging out of that particular experience, and I think I'm not ready for anyone to know whether I'm lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender. And we're working around guidance that says, okay, well, sometimes that professional judgment is, okay, do you know what, I'm going to be aware of your situation, but I'm not going to share this. But now you have to record why you haven't shared it. But we've got an opportunity with the guidance to help improve practice around focusing on sharing concerns where the best interest and the wishes of children are at the heart of that. I think if it was applied very literally, the named person wouldn't move some days for concerns about behaviour. But I think we've got an opportunity to present. This is going to impact on every policy across the country as well, because the expectations around sharing concerns about welfare will have an impact on local authorities. We're currently recording isn't very good.
Can I say, it was a point that was made that you highlighted earlier, which was to do with, the access schools actually get to the internet at the moment. Well, part of the ICT Excellence Group put a report into the Education Minister, which was accepted in full. And one of the things that was actually recommended was that blockage on school systems should be put down to teacher level, so that when teachers actually wanted to have something on the net that was just had a blanket ban on, that they would be able to actually go and remove it for the time of their lesson, and then actually put it back on again. And the National Parent Forum definitely thinks it would be a great way, to make sure that when Brian was talking about things that teachers can't currently access, that they can. Because there's things, some schools, you go in, and some authorities, and you go and type in Middlesex, you want to know something about Middlesex, and you can't get in because it's got the words SEX in it. And even today, in my day job, I don't know why it is, but I was over in Fife, and Fife NHS has banned access to Marie Curie. So if you're on the intranet in Fife, you can't. So it's getting all these things, sorted. It just reminded me, obviously saw the daffodil.
Yes, indeed. I can't understand why that would be the case, but I know we personally know lots of examples of that kind of thing when words are perfectly innocent, but they could also be something else if you were typing them into a Google search or whatever search engine you happen to use. So
but it's imperative that that teachers have the access to all the tools, so they can maybe go themselves and during and then explain once the teachers get taught, so they can explain to children the dangers as part of a lesson. But at the moment they can't, because they can't go and access Instagram, they can't go and access Facebook, they can't go and access Twitter and say to children, if you're doing this is what happens. Everybody sees it. You know, just because you send it to a friend, your friend might be open, so they've passed it on to all their friends, etc., etc., etc. So if the teachers could have that ability to go and use it, you know, for the purposes of teaching, and then shut it down again, definitely be all for that.
Thank you very much. Can I once again apologise for the delay in getting to the panel this morning, but it's been a very interesting session, and we appreciate you coming along and giving of your time to the committee this morning. So thank you once again, and with that, can I close the meeting?